Hello, romance lovers. Today's story is called I'm Going to Rewrite the Devastating Novel. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out on more exciting stories. The events begin to unfold in an unusual high tower, above which lightning flashes and the wind howls from behind thick clouds, and the tower itself looks as if it is a place for imprisoning people. Already in it, a certain smiling guy who stood behind the blue-haired lady looked at someone and told her that these were exactly the ones she asked to show, as if he was talking about slaves who were specially bred for the aristocrat. And while there were guards, knights, and security guards around the blue-haired lady, who was clearly of noble origin, she herself looked in surprise at those who were brought to her, while the guy told her that these were the magicians who were prepared especially for her. There really were two people in front of her, or rather, a girl with the same blue hair and a brunette, who, unlike his partner, was completely tied up and even his mouth was covered so that he wouldn't make any sounds. While one slave with a chain around her neck was thinking that the aristocrat in front of her was very beautiful, the lady herself was looking at the guy who was slyly telling her. The brunette said this because the aristocrat now needs to choose a mate for herself. That is, a suitable magician for her. And while other people were talking about this, but unlike her, the guy next to her was not so kind because he literally had burning red eyes and an angry expression on his face with which he looked at everyone because he was being kept here by force. And in fact, the protagonist, looking at the furious psychopath next to her, understood his feelings because he would not even be able to resist due to the extraordinary seal in his soul, which, like a black spot. However, this will soon come to an end because an aristocrat with blue eyes and a sweet appearance appeared before them, who wants to choose one magician for her own purposes. But before that, she pointed at herself and asked the smiling brunette if she could really only take one magician for herself, as if she was interested in where the one she didn't choose would go. The brown-haired guy smiled again and said that it was so, because there were only 3 people in the pair, and not 3. And after that, the blue-haired lady asked him what would happen to the one she didn't choose. Smiling mysteriously once again, the boy told the lady that since both of these mages were born from her mana, they would not. And so, when the main character and the psychopath were standing in the shadows, the guy said that based on this, one can conclude that the one she doesn't choose will be useless, because a couple needs one. But the blue-haired girl with sky-blue eyes was horrified by the fact that according to the brown-haired guy, the extra mage would be disposed of, or rather, killed, she made her choice anyway, which she told the brunette, while the main character with long hair and pink eyes looked ahead and understood that she knew all the events in advance, which is why nothing surprised her. Watching as the lady with the deep blue eyes spoke loudly that she would double the initial promised amount 5 times, the protagonist was not surprised because she knew how it would all happen. And after the girl announced her verdict, the guy with brown hair bowed to her and said that in that case, he would hand over the right to control the slaves, and soon. As soon as one servant pulled one chain, which connected the psycho with the main character, the crazy guy, the heroine watched as the servants pulled the chain, forcing the psycho to follow them. But he resisted and growled, which told the girl that the boy did not just want to resist, but wanted. The thing is that magicians are not just people with staffs and beards who are dressed in a brown cloak with a cap, but those who lead the entire empire in the magical world. And this is exactly what one man at the table told his colleagues, also clarifying that magicians themselves are not subject to anything and do not get sick, but they can one day become fatally ill with some kind of mana disease. Then the people at the round table came up with the idea of creating those people who would be able to accumulate and absorb mana. That is, create those who would not just hold a magic crystal in their hands, but also be those creatures who use black magic. Later, it was the inhabitants of the empire who had developed mana who issued a decree that a mana stone had to be sent to the Tower of the Mages. And thus, when they met, if a mage, upon becoming an adult, registered with the association, the one who was born from his stone became his property. The main character was thinking about this, sitting at the table sometime after meeting a certain aristocrat, because such a scheme was called a couple. That is, the moment. And when the girl was thinking that if she had not been created, she would not have been locked here, she noticed that the door to her room slowly opened, and behind it, someone said in a stern voice that it was time for a check. The main character decided to get up from the table because this man turned out to be the guard, who ordered her to get up from her seat and show the handcuffs that were binding her mana. And the lady, meanwhile, looked at him with pink eyes. Approaching the guard, who has simple iron armor, the girl raised her hands to him in order to show him on her wrists exactly what makes her not use her magic against everyone. The thing is that she really did have some bracelets of a soft blue color on her hands, which had magical properties for dampening her mana and magic. But the lady was already so accustomed to being checked that she silently carried out all orders. However, when she remembered that she once touched a magical mana stone that has an unusual blue color and even levitates in the air, she realized that she had memories that were unfamiliar to her, in addition to the understanding that she was a minor character in the world. Thanks to these memories, the girl realized that she had been reborn into the world from the novel, where the main character is the same blue-haired beauty who, according to the plot, was surrounded by the shadows of her admirers, the same heroes. The blue-eyed aristocrat was surrounded all her life by attractive guys with different appearances and high status, who wanted her attention and love, but the lady lived, and the main character could not escape from them even when she was lying in the shadows, because all her admirers followed her and wanted to quickly receive her love, which only annoyed the beauty. But also, in addition to all the fans of the main character, who are the main characters in the novel, the same psychopath with whom the girl was brought together by fate also plays a big role in the plot, and the protagonist herself is considered a secondary lady, who does not have any role in the plot, because she is just an extra who has nothing to do with the affairs of the aristocrats and the development of the plot. And at that moment, when she found herself in an empty world, where there was nothing but her and the magic stone, she suddenly wondered who created this novel and why she was reborn. However, everything around her turned red and unpleasant when she realized that not only did she not remember her past life, not having even the slightest memory of it, it was these thoughts that made the girl think. But she widened her eyes in surprise when she was brought back to reality by the sudden voice of one of the guards as she continued to walk towards them down the corridor. She looked ahead and saw not only a knight who was clearly angry at someone, but also asking someone with shock and rage what happened here, as if a prisoner appeared near the heroine, who calmly looked at her and said that there was not a day when that psychopath did not cause problems for the guards. But while the protagonist was surprised by this, one of the knights actually shouted that the prisoner had bitten his hand. And as soon as the heroine came closer, she saw two guards who were tying up that same psychopath with chains and shouting at him, while he himself was completely covered. He twitched so hard and so continuously that the knights could not hold him back. So they wrapped him in chains and gagged him, and with his crazy red eyes, he looked at the main character, as if he was no longer a man, but a real beast, who was deprived of everything human through isolation, violence, and rude treatment. There were clearly visible bloodstains on his white shirt, and the psycho himself was tied up so tightly that he couldn't move his arms, but he still continued to resist the guards, as if he was about to get out. He still kept moving so that the guards could not hold him back, causing the men to order him to stop resisting immediately. Otherwise, they would have to throw him in prison or beat him. And while the main character looked at the one who was not going to obey anyone in surprise and fascination, the knight behind her lightly pushed her on the shoulder and told her in the same way they pushed an unknown guy who was near the protagonist. But he began to complain and told the guards that he did not need to be pushed, because he would go forward himself without being forced. And when the girl looked at the back of the psychopath who was in front of her, she remembered that his name was Kal, which in this world means the number 0. But it is not just like that, because a person in light clothes but around whom there was only darkness had an unusually high amount of mana, which is what changes to a smaller number. And in his case, if he is 0, he is stronger than all the magicians in the tower. The lady, when she also felt the darkness around her, looked at Kal and because of him remembered that her name was Yule, which in this world means the number 2, when she has significantly less magic than remembering that in this tower, magicians can easily be beaten until they bleed and left in a dark dungeon to die. The girl realized that she was born in the very place where she does not even have a last name, but only names that denote numbers. And while she was thinking about this, she continued to calmly follow Call, thinking about his resistance, saying that it was very strong and fierce, but it seemed to her that in this place it was impossible to achieve her independence. The main character looked at him for a reason, because among all the same magicians like Call, he didn't seem to stand out. But as soon as the heroine imagined how everyone around him disappeared and turned into bloody stains, the girl remembered that he was one of the main characters in the plot of the novel, while the others were just extras, including her. Thanks to the fact that the lady knows the plot, the protagonist is already preparing for the fact that Kal will not just escape from captivity in the future, but will turn into a sinister psychopath with black. However, he will not stop there, because soon he will stand before the bloody world with this same sword in order to destroy the entire empire because of his anger and aggression, becoming the main villain in the novel. And she also remembered how the girl was sleeping on the floor right in front of Kal, who at that time was looking at her face and examining her hair. She understood that this guy was special from the. When the girl opened her eyes, she was shocked to see a red-eyed guy in front of her, who had no evil intentions, because he was just looking at the lady in complete silence. But she was still surprised, looking at his black hair and bright eyes in response, realizing that he was very handsome. Even though he was a psychopath who would have silently getting up from the floor, the guy with white clothes and chains all over his body wanted to move away from her, while the girl continued to look at him and remember that she grew up with him from the very beginning, noticing that she, unlike her cellmate, stood up with difficulty, as if her body was fettering itself. She saw how the psycho stood in front of a certain guy who had previously told the blue-haired aristocrat about magicians. As soon as he appeared in the dark, cold, and uncomfortable room, the psycho immediately grabbed the brunette by the collar and began to aggressively ask him what they had done to him. But in response, it seemed that his eyes began to glow in the same way, while he himself smiled at the psychopath as if he were the main person in the tower, who had the right to do whatever he wanted with his subordinates. But the madman, embittered by everyone, did not want to listen to silence, so he continued to hold the aristocrat by the. Besides him and the brown-haired guy, there were unknown individuals with hoods in the dungeon who, with the same smile, told the psycho that and one of them, having a glowing blue eye and a sly smile, told Kal that his role in this world was to obey the same magicians as him. However, as soon as Kal began to emit a strange and ominous purple smoke around himself, all the hooded mages around him began to worry and talk to each other, but the aristocracy himself calmed the excitement of his subordinates, showing them his palm and thus smilingly saying that there was no need to worry, because now he would put him in his place. And immediately after that, the guy with just one wave of his hand made Kal fall to the floor in front of him, when because of his magic his hands also. While the psycho only clenched his teeth in anger and became increasingly angry at everyone around him, which is why his red eyes glowed brighter and brighter. The aristocta, sitting down in front of Kal, the smiling gentleman said that he was surprised that even in an unconscious state he could use his magic, and that is why he would give him a suitable, special name. And when the guy asked the psycho what name would suit him, he decided not only to put Kal in his place, but also to step on him with his foot, which made the psycho even. It was then, while the aristocrat's foot was still on the psycho's back, as if he were his personal subordinate who could be mocked, that he said that it would be best to call him by the name Kal. At that moment, the noble man, who was constantly smiling, seemed to have an epiphany, because he opened his eyes wider and said the name again, telling everyone present that it was brilliant, and that was why they would call him. And when the leg made Kal shake and press himself to the floor even more, muffling his destructive magic, the guy with a smile and a rough tone ordered the psycho. He even began gesturing with his hand in front of everyone, looking at each person present and asking them if they liked his option, as if he intended to hear words of support from. He could scare anyone with his crazy emotions, so he looked at everyone with sinister eyes and a smile, telling everyone with joy that the name Kal was incredibly suitable for such a psychopath. And while everyone laughed at Kal and made fun of his name, the main character looked at everything with parted lips and sincere regret. She heard laughter, which became more and more disgusting to her with each passing second. But she could do nothing but watch everything, because this is exactly what the main character was remembering until she was pushed from behind into a certain room, which caused her to return to reality and begin to look at the floor in shock, not understanding where she was taken. And before finally closing the door, the guard in armor in front of her said that he was giving her exactly 10 minutes to complete a certain task. Turning to the room itself, the girl remembered that as soon as the inspection ends, all the most boring tasks are dumped on them. That is, the slaves, which is what she will be doing now, but not alone. And she looked at Call, who was still tied up and his mouth was gagged. But he, sitting on a chair, looked at the bright view, and the girl decided to approach the psycho, looking at him with obvious displeasure. But at that time, the guy did not even turn his head in her direction, as if he was alone in the room. Noticing that Anya was clearly pretending not to look at her, the girl decided to hit him on the back of the head with her hand, causing the guy to duck briefly and flinch at the same time. And after that, Kal looked at her, which is what the main character wanted, noticing his red eyes, but not at all angry, with which he often looks at his hated guards. He continued to look at her even when the girl with blue hair sat down at the chair in front of her and silently began to look at him, which is why the guy himself began to look at her, waiting for her to say. She already wanted to get angry at him because the guy in front of her was silent and just staring at her. But when she began to frown, looking at his face, she dropped that the psycho couldn't speak because of the thing in his mouth. That's why she decided to quickly remove the strange object from his face, which caused her hand to reach for the back of his head. And the lady herself looked at him and said that at this rate, he would definitely drive her to the grave. Telling him that because of his violent nature, the guards decided to gag him and forbade him from healing him with magic, which is why now she must heal him from his numerous wounds. The girl removed the gag. After that, she began to look at the face of the amazing guy with red eyes. A cute face that was covered in thin scratches, thinking about why he didn't resist her, while he fought almost to the death with others. And when she sat down in front of him at the chair and began to look at him, which the guy did too, Kal did not say anything unnecessary, but only said something about his lip, which surprised. She decided to point her finger at him and asked the psycho if he meant that he had a wound on his lip that needed to be healed. But in response, the man only remained silent, continuing to look at the girl. But the guy remained silent as if Yule was irritating him more and more because his red eyes were glowing, warning that he could easily get angry. But what exactly it was that displeased him so much, and all because he did not mean his lip and did not even talk about himself, but asked the lady about her face because he noticed a small wound near her mouth, which surprised the girl herself, touching the small scratch with her index finger. The girl was even more surprised when the guy told her menacingly that he knew she had been hit earlier, and because of him, everything around her seemed to go dark, because Yule became wary. And while the psycho was menacingly asking the lady who did it, she herself remembered how 30 minutes ago, an unknown but he even pulled her face towards him, calling her a toy in the hands of humanity, because she was created by humans with the help of magic, which is why she is so beautiful, charming, and attractive, especially to men. However, the attacker did not manage to do anything bad to Yule, because he received a good blow to the face, which is why drops of blood appeared on his cheek. And while he called her a piece of trash, also saying that she wasn't even human, the girl herself only held her hand raised, looking at the stranger and feeling a small wound near her. Now she is sitting in front of that guy, who is asking him in a menacing voice to tell him what happened to her. But the blue-haired lady does not understand why he is so interested in her that he is angry. She became even more wary when the guy suddenly jumped up from his chair and hovered over her, looking into her eyes and saying that he knew perfectly well that it was not just a scratch on her cheek. His red eyes burned brighter and brighter as he begged the girl to tell who exactly had let go of his hands and who had dared to hit her. But Yule remained silent out of caution. The brunette ordered her to speak, but at that moment the lady felt the entire sinister aura of Kal's red magic, which could only be awakened by his rage. She decided that she would not tell him anything about the one who hit her, because she imagined in her head what Kal would be like in the future. An ominous ruler and an invincible tyrant. That's why she pushed him away from her with her hands, telling him that his emotions were unnecessary here. And after the girl lowered her eyes down to examine the first aid kit in front of her and cure the psycho, thinking along the way about why the guy was behaving so strangely today, Cal loudly and suddenly told her. That's why she once again raised her surprised eyes to him and confessed that the first thing she wanted to ask was why he decided to say this. But she didn't even dare to do it from shock, feeling an even darker aura around her. And she didn't hear it right, because the guy looked at the girl with his red eyes and for the second time ordered her to get out of here as quickly as possible, if he felt something or understood something. But this only caused indignation in Yul, which was also depicted on her face when she herself did not understand anything, continuing to keep her mouth open and wondering when everything around them seemed to blur and become darker, the girl continued to look at him and try to guess for herself why he told her to get out of here, while the psycho was silent and didn't even look at her. However, she still decided to get up from her chair and close her eyes to everything, because she remembered that the psycho had always treated her with little respect, perhaps because of his strange character. But Karl still stood his ground. She looked at the man who did not even turn his head in her direction because he was looking at the window, as if he did not want to see in front of him a lady who had only become even more angry with him. The girl decided not to say goodbye to him, but to immediately turn around and leave him, gradually walking towards the door. But as she reached out her hand to the door to push it open, she paused, as if to make sure she was doing everything correctly and had clearly understood Karl's demands. Turning around, she looked at the man who was still sitting silently on the chair, tied up, and even at that moment he did not look at her or follow her with his eyes, wanting only to— She looked not only at his face, but also at the wounds on it, which were visible even in the small light, which made her hand was touching the door, but her head was turned towards the guy, which is why the doubting lady decided to ask the psychopath if she really should leave. In response, the brunette only got angry and frowned, asking the girl why she was still here, as if the doubts in the girl's presence here made him even angrier. Yul decided to leave, and after some time she woke up from a deep sleep, rubbing her face with her hand and looking around, also realizing that she fell asleep while reading a book in the library, right at the table. But she was slightly surprised when she saw a certain pink-haired guy in front of her, whom she looked at, calling him by the name Lev, as if not taking a closer look at the guy's smile, who was showing off his cute, charming appearance. The girl remembered that his name was Lev for a reason, but because of the third level of mana he had. Even after he said with a smile that he woke her up so that she wouldn't sleep here, but would go to her room, the girl laughed nervously, because she knows that usually other test subjects don't interact with others. But what surprised her even more was when she turned her head and noticed something strange to her, which she looked at with stunned eyes, adjusting her long hair with her hand. Looking at the library, which had certainly been filled with noise before because of the people, or rather, several people, who were with the heroine at the time when she was still reading, the girl realized, and when she turned her head back to Lev, she noticed a strange scratch on him, very visible on his pale face, which is why she asked the guy what it was. But right after that, he laughed awkwardly and began to tell Yul that this was just nonsense, also pointing his index finger at his face with a smile. Even when the girl asked him when exactly the magician would come, he continued to smile, saying that he didn't know and therefore assumed that he would probably come down for the— Taking the book in her hand, Yul looked at the guy and asked him why he shouldn't at least use the medicine if the magician who wouldn't heal him with his magic didn't come. But Lev replied that even if the wound became infected, he would use other spells to instantly get rid of the wound. But the protagonist didn't like the answer because she looked at him with suspicion, because she didn't understand why Lev was so stupid that he intended to fix even the smallest scratches on his body. Imagining herself and Leo as small silhouettes on a red background, the girl remembered that for them, created by mania, it is dangerous to rely on, and she wanted to say something to the guy about this. But at the very last moment, she changed her mind, which is why she looked away and told Lev that he should forget about what just happened, because it doesn't matter. But he still stayed near her, or rather, sat down near the table, looking out and looking at her, asking with interest if she was angry with him. But at that time, the blue-haired hair— She looked at him calmly and said that it was not so, also asking him if he was sure about it, as if she also wanted to hear his opinion. And she looked at the guy who looked at her sweetly and hid his bright face under the table, telling Yul that in his opinion, she was still angry with him, which is why he was embarrassed in front of her. And when the owl began to tell Leo that he seemed to know that she was angry with him, the girl became truly angry, turning to him and shouting that this was not so, but by doing so, she also. Because of this, the guy looked at the girl, albeit very sweetly but warily, as if he were a small child who did not expect at all that they would yell at him, and therefore remained silent. He looked down sadly, trying to say something about her anger, but he was unable to do so because he was interrupted by someone who suddenly burst into the library. This man turned out to be a knight in iron armor, who began to shout at Yule and Lev, asking them if they knew what time it was, intending to stop talking in the library and go to bed. Only because of the knight's commanding voice did Lev instantly stand up and look at him in shock and even fear, while the blue-haired girl continued to rage, holding the book in her hand in silence. The first to want to leave the library was Lev, who ate without unnecessary words and farewells to the heroine, while she herself got up from the. And when the girl came closer to the guard, everything in front of her seemed to become darker and gloomier because the mysterious and silent knight was clearly hiding some intentions, because he continued to stand in the library, as if waiting for something. The lady's fears were confirmed, because after Leo walked away, leaving them alone, the knight grabbed the main character's wrist while she wanted to stretch out her hand to the door in order to leave. And while the main character was looking at the guard's hand and was surprised by his actions, the guy himself ordered her to follow her in such a voice as if he had some task that someone from above had previously entrusted to him. Even after that, he did not let go of her hand, but simply continued to walk quickly, dragging the girl behind him, which is why she asked the guard why he did not let her go if he was convinced that she was already following him. Immediately ordering the girl to shut her mouth, the guy continued walking down the dark corridor, holding the heroine's hand very tightly, which made her even more wary, realizing that she had never. Yule fleetingly thought that the same thing could happen to her as during the day. Or rather, how an unknown man pulled her towards him, grabbed her by the face, and only because of these thoughts, without any idea of what would happen if she followed him, the main character decided to abruptly pull her hand back and force the guard to let her go by saying that she would not go anywhere with him, which caused him to turn around angrily. And right after that, she decided to run as fast as she could from the person who could do literally anything to her. She came up with a plan on the fly to break into someone's room in order to attract someone's attention and at least not be left alone with the guard, which is why she was going to open the door in the semi-dark, and she managed to do it, which is why she ran while the guard continued to chase her no matter what, which the protagonist did too, intending to break away from him or meet someone in the room. Having torn herself away from him, the girl managed to close the door behind her and press her back against him, after which she began to calmly inhale and exhale air because of the escape. But for now, she did not even suspect whose room she had ended up in. And the real shock for her was that Kal, whose cell it was looking at her with curiosity and surprise. But the lady herself could not see where exactly she had entered because of the darkness, because there weren't even torches or lanterns. She looked at him with great shock on her face, not believing that by trying to run away from one problem or even hide from the guard, she had created a new problem for herself, because Kal would definitely not leave this just like that. Yul looked at the guy who seemed to be tied up because even his hands were securely cuffed, like those of real psychos. But she was still scared, and she also asked herself why fate brought her together with him. And he was already looking at her with red eyes, as if guessing that the alarmed girl had not just burst into his room with such noise, even carefully closing the door behind her, as if she had a pursuer. The girl thought in time that now she did not have time to figure out how exactly such an absurd situation had happened. So she looked at the psychopath in surprise, and the surprised guy asked her what she meant, but in response, the lady only began to shake her head, looking around the room and telling him that any object that could be waved would do for her. The main character looked anxiously at each piece of furniture in the psycho's cell and realized that she did not see anything suitable for herself, although she knew that you would not find such a thing in the rooms of ordinary. And it was even more late for her to do anything, because the one she was running away from was able to easily open the doors and appear in the cell. Nervously exhaling and inhaling air, he ordered her to come to him immediately and follow him without resistance, saying this through his teeth with incredible malice. But the girl only turned to him and replied that she would go with him only if he told her where he wanted to take her. However, as soon as she turned around, she saw something in front of her that made her look up, silently and stunned, looking at the one who was able to suddenly and silently appear next to her. This man turned out to be Kal, who also looked at her eyes with deep silence, as if intending to intervene in the situation. Despite the astonished main character looking directly at the psychopath's face, suddenly realized that now she would not have to look for an object for self-defense, because now she would have to do everything possible to prevent the guard and Call from killing each other. Only after a couple of minutes of silently examining the guy's appearance, the girl sheepishly looked away and looked at the floor, telling her friend that if he wanted to ask her what was going on. However, the lady was unable to finish speaking because the tall brunette in front of her was already looking at the guard and ordering him to leave immediately, also not taking his bright red eyes off him as if something was awakening in his soul. In response, the guard only became more angry, causing everything around him to seem red as blood as he angrily spoke, saying that if this slave girl follows him, she will not. He even pointed his finger at the main character, calling her the worst names and telling her that he told her to go out and behave well, but she didn't listen to him, which could get her into trouble. But he was never able to talk to Yule anymore, because Kyle blocked her with his broad back, not allowing the guard to even get a good look at the girl. He saw a menacing, dangerous magician. He decided to tell the warrior once again to get out of his cell immediately, looking at him with even more hatred and rage, from which his eyes shone brighter and brighter, and it seemed that he was about. And while the main character did not understand what exactly her friend had eaten that was causing him to behave so strangely, the guard only clenched his teeth in anger. After the guard finally decided to retreat, closing the door behind him with a bang, the psycho suddenly turned his whole body towards the main character, which frightened Yule, and she was also going to find. Having decided to briefly apologize to Call for interfering in his cell and interrupting his rest, the girl was already saying goodbye to him and wanted to leave. But the sinister. And then she decided to sit down at the chair in front of the guy, touching her temple with her finger and frowning as she talked about the security guard who was acting very strangely. But when the girl decided to ask Kal why he was asking her for an explanation if he was still sitting in front of her with a dissatisfied face and did not believe her, she saw that the frowning psychopath in front of her. Glancing briefly at the window and noticing the night landscape, the girl realized that she needed to return to her room a long time ago. But suddenly Kal spoke up, telling her that she needed to be. He tilted his head forward and looked at the floor in embarrassment, explaining his words by saying that the heroine was too kind for those who only intended to use her or were simply bad people. Looking at the window, which clearly interested him, the guy said that as long as she continued to care about those around her, they would continue to compare her to trash. And she was even more surprised when Kal looked at her and said that he knew that the guard often pestered her, which made the girl stunned, asking him several times about what he had said. The brunette remained calm, looking at the lady's face, telling her that he already understood that it was he who hurt her lip, which made the stunned Jirinu only look at the guy and listen to his words. She looked at Kal with wide eyes and parted lips and couldn't believe that she was so attentive. But most of all, she thought about why exactly he decided to. Memories of the past quickly surfaced in her mind when the man clearly allowed himself too much, holding her face and pulling her towards him with a sinister smile, which made the lady assume that Kal was talking about this particular magician. So she started gesturing with her hand in front of him, telling him that it was a guard that time, and the one responsible for them was a magician. While Kal in front of her continued. But while the girl again did not understand for what purpose the psychopath was asking her about all this, the brunette calmly said that now he understood everything, looking away, as if now because of the heroine's words he thought even more. In response, the bewildered heroine asked the psycho what she was doing wrong when he found out such details, and when this time Kal did not answer her in any way, she became even more angry, which caused a lightning bolt of rage to flash past her, which flared. Remembering how the girl could sometimes treat Kal by applying healing ointments to his cheek with her finger, the girl said that in that case she would go to her room, because she had already told him everything. Remembering also how bright, sunny, albeit artificially created by magic, light penetrated into the cells, the girl realized that because it had been calm lately. However, this time did not last long, because the day came when Kal was dragged by force into the Tower of the Mages, bloody and seemingly beaten to. Not only she was looking at him, but also other magicians, who were whispering that because of Kal's attack on someone, the tower's master had ordered this psycho to be exiled. And at that time, Lev was also standing next to her, watching the beaten call and asking his friend if he had died, to which the shackled main character replied that it seemed like this psychopath would live. The worried main character looked at the guy and understood that she was clearly worried about him and really wanted to help, which was visible on her work. However, moments in her life quickly flashed through her mind, which indicated that Kal was completely different from the person the world was used to seeing him as, because he also protected her even when he was completely tied up, fenced her off from unpleasant people, and protected her like his own sister. That's why the girl often saw in front of her not a bloodthirsty psychopath who only wanted freedom and blood, but a calm guy who closed his eyes when Yule. That is why even now the main character is not confident in herself, because what worries her most is whether her friend, about whom she began to think and worry more and more every. However, she still decided to turn away from him, convincing herself that she was doing everything right, and that in fact, Kal, bloodthirsty and exhausted, did not need any help or support from her. Then she turned away from him and ran to the stairs up, while the guy himself continued to sit on the cold floor, completely covered in blood and unconscious, also when his neck was held by a security guard. This is what the protagonist would have done if she hadn't been worried about the psychopath at all, because she threw all her thoughts of running away aside, only approaching the mutilated. And while Lev himself was surprised by this, stunned, watching his friend, Yule had already come closer to one of the guards, which also surprised him. He asked the heroine what, having heard only the order to let the girl through to call. The astonished knight looked at the girl and tried to understand why she was so worried about the psychopath, and wanted to help him, even if he was causing only harm to. And while the Rutskoy continued to hold the unconscious Kal by the collar, he looked at the lady in light clothes, who was not afraid not only to violate the order, but also to shout at the guard to immediately release Kal. Hearing the lovely lady's intentions, one of the mages named Rox, who has the fourth most powerful Machna, the weakest of all, began to laugh at Yule, asking her if she wanted. The serious-minded girl asked Rox to move away from her, while he continued to joke and laugh at her, asking what she would do with Kal alone in a dark cell, while asking other. Hearing Roxak's jokes, the guard mistakenly assumed that this was all taken seriously, and that the girl really wanted to be alone with Kal, which caused him to only smile. After wishing the main character a good time with her lover, the guard and Rox left, leaving the blue-haired lady alone with the exhausted Kal, who was lying on the floor with bloodstains. She sighed, realizing that she hadn't wanted to get involved with the main villain of the novel from the start, but her excitement and concern for Kal were stronger than her previously set goals, which is why she was now next to him. And sometimes she looked at Kal's bloody face, realizing that now he would be kept in this dungeon until the tower's master passed sentence on him. When the girl was wondering if Kal had killed someone, which is why he was beaten so badly that now only the removal of the forbidden magic would cure him, she noticed that he moved slightly, which surprised her. She immediately decided to open her own pharmacy, even if it wasn't the richest in medicines, but she still considered it and prepared to cure the psychopath, telling herself that the first thing the lady decided to do was to turn Kal onto his back before doing anything to him, much less giving him medicine. And at that time, she also examined his wounds and the blood on the fabric. And as soon as she took off the guy's clothes, she saw in front of her not just a beautiful and fit male body, but all scratched skin, which was covered with bloodstains, because of which she blushed, but still continued to examine all the curves of the psychopath's body with special interest and admiration, because Kal turned out to be handsome to her not only in face, but also in body. Having collected her thoughts, the main character realized that she should not have been distracted by the aesthetics of her friend's body, so she immediately began to treat all the wounds on his body, which she did with a small nap. At this rate, she continued to heal Kal's entire body when others would not even dare to do so, asking herself how he did not even flinch when she applied the medicine to. Even after several days had passed since she had been constantly coming to Kal's cell to treat him, she still walked to his door, intending to provide treatment. Sitting down next to him, the girl understood that he still hadn't woken up after such a long time, and she also remembered that even despite the final verdict of the tower's owner, she was sure that Kal would still leave this building, even in such a state. But the thought of the guy's death still did not leave the girl, but on the contrary, even made everything around fill with a red glow, which only meant Yule's worry that, however, her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock behind the door and scratching sounds, as if someone from outside was about to open it, which made the girl try to turn her head towards the source of the sound. This man turned out to be a guard, who announced that it was time for an inspection, which caused the main character to rise to her feet and was about to traditionally show the guard her wrists with handcuffs. And after that, she followed the guard down the dark corridor, not even suspecting what would happen next. She looked at the back of the guard's head and at the same time followed him, asking what decision the tower's owner had made regarding Call, to which he replied, "Well done. The thing is that they both saw in front of them the man they were least prepared to see with their own eyes." But he also said in his rough voice that now, and this man was the very owner of the tower, who appeared before Yule and the guard, frightened by his appearance. But the brown-haired patient himself seemed to remain calm. And the main character looked at him with shock, asking herself whether the owner of the tower personally asked the guards to bring her to him, so that he could then meet. This same sinister man extended his hand to the main character, smiling at her and saying that everything was fine, because he would only need to take control of her as a magician for a while. But it sounded rather. As soon as the tower owner said that the reason why things were going this way was because the magician responsible for her had suddenly died, she recalled with a stunned face the very moment when she had last seen him and when he had passed. Surprised by such events, Galdvnak Gayonch asked the owner of the tower when exactly this happened, to which he answered with a sweet smile, saying that it was 5 days ago. Starting to think carefully about what happened 5 days ago, the blue-haired girl remembered that it was exactly 5 days ago that she began to take care of Kal, noticed his serious wounds and that he was literally lying on the ground unconscious. As soon as the main character thought for a second that Kal, who could flare up with anger even in the most harmless conflict so that others would definitely get into trouble, was involved in the death of the responsible. She imagined in her head Kal, who received bloodstains not because of his own wounds, but because of the reprisal against the magician who had previously been waiting for Yule and pestering her. And while she was thinking about this, realizing that Kal was to blame for what happened, who dealt with the magician, the owner of the tower himself checked the handcuffs of the main character. He also smiled, looking not only at the protagonist's handcuffs, but also at her hands and wrists, telling her with a smile that he had not been appointed responsible. The main character decided to pull her hand away from the unpleasant sensations, but the guy with brown hair still smiled at her so ominously that Yule felt uneasy, because she knew that you wouldn't just meet this person, even if you really. But she also remembered Kal's body, realizing that this was just a chance for her to do something that she would never be able to do right now. So she decided to get up. And so, the first thing that the girls with the cute appearance began to tell the owner of the tower was her dream, because of which she imagined a blue crystal in front of her. She also named the name of the very owner of the stone, namely Estella, telling the owner of the tower that there was a girl with that name. It worked, and so the brown-haired guy looked at the lady with a stunned expression on his face, as if she had found out something that was not planned to be told to her, and Yule, meanwhile, understood that her plan had succeeded. The blue-haired lady looked at the guy and understood that he was already excited by this story, because she initially knows from the plot that Estella, the blue-eyed aristocrat who came to them earlier, is the owner of. Remembering the same mistress of the mana stone that they had met earlier, the girl recalled that her name was Estella, and that she was also the main character of the novel. And she told the guy for the reason that it is not just that she often appears behind the tower owner's back, but for the reason that her family is against the immoral system of creating creatures from mana stone, and her family is constant. And so, when she now stood in front of the guy, she understood that any story she told regarding Estella would be important, because the owner of the tower would definitely want to find an ideal match for such an important person like her. The guy was very surprised that the girl told him her dream, in which Estella was very worried about both of them, that is, Kal and Yule, and also struggled so. That is why he began to ask the heroine with the same interest and concern how the dream ended, whether she chose her, as if he had already perceived Yule's dream as a prophecy or prediction. And when the girl imagined in her mind how, against a red background, Call in aristocratic clothes takes Estella by the throat, Yule sternly told the owner of the tower that she had chosen a psychopath as her. Hearing this, the brown-haired guy thought, raising his index finger to his lips and telling the lady that it was amazing, while the protagonist clearly understood that he also looked away, telling the girl that although there were creatures who had special abilities, like the magician's mana, he admitted to the lady that he most likely considered her story to be true. After that, he immediately grabbed the girl by the hand and with joy on his face told her that she and Kal were the most amazing creatures. But when he ominously told her that from now on she could not worry about what would happen to the one whom the mistress did not choose, because even in that case they would come up with an important task for the magician. And when the main character was indignant at the suspicious plans of the tower owner, she remembered that immediately after he removed the magical curse imposed on Kal, he appointed a certain lady to watch him. Or rather, it was in front of her that the protagonist appeared after some time, looking at the unfamiliar owner of the tower and asking her if she had slept, being interested in her health first and foremost. And when Mel didn't answer her, the heroine sighed heavily, telling her to go to sleep and have a good rest. But she replied that she wasn't tired at all. Noticing some romantic undertone in the main character's words, which in fact was not there, Mel began waving, and after the girl left, Yule approached Call, who was lying in bed and still could not wake up. But she also noticed from his face that the color of his skin had become healthier, precisely because of the healing magic that the owner of the tower. She even got angry, realizing that Call was being courted precisely because she told about the dream, which is why everyone now thinks that Estella will choose him. But after that, she sighed and realized only that she didn't want to be involved with him anymore, because she felt that he would cause her a lot of trouble if she already knew from the plot that Call would be the main villain in the plot. After that, she decided to sit down in front of him on a chair and enjoy the silence, thinking about the future and occasionally looking at Call, who was lying in bed and was not yet showing any signs of life. But only she also thought about the past, which is why she remembered her childhood, when she was still very little in simple clothes, when she was in a dark alley, but looking at someone who. The thing is that the main character first met Call at a young age, namely at the moment when she decided to go somewhere. But a simple boy in shorts and a sweater told her to get, and they were talking about the magic tower near which they were. But Call still opened his mouth in front of the protagonist and told her not to go there. Little Yule continued to look at Call and ask him if he hadn't also come here to ask for money or food, which she wanted to do, also intending to go and ask for help from those in the magic. And when the boy in front of her started screaming in anger, asking if she really thought he would do something like that, the girl in front of him said with a calm, but the red-eyed boy was still angry, which is why he looked at the main character, gritting his teeth even harder, because even at that age, he seemed to be worried about her more than about himself. Because even now, he has not lost his care and concern for her, even when he became an adult guy with incredible strength and a desire to get out of the magic tower. Also, this is exactly what the main character dreamed about, because she herself did not notice how she fell asleep in Call's cell. But when she opened her eyes, she realized that she was in a bed, but clearly not her own. And she also said, realizing that she had been sleeping in his bed all this time, the lady immediately jumped up and indignantly asked Call if he knew how long he had been awake, while the psycho himself was calmly sitting on a chair in front of her and keeping silent. However, as soon as she noticed something strange about Call's appearance, Yule immediately fell silent, looking at him with ambiguous emotions, as if she had a lot of questions for him. The thing is that the brunette with red eyes in front of her had absolutely no wounds on his body. His face was even shining, which the girl had noticed earlier, but there were still bloodstains on his clothes. Noticeable. Jumping out of bed, the girl came closer to the guy in order to open his clothes and look at his chest, as if she had a thought that could turn out to be true, which she would. Looking at Call's pumped-up body, the lady was surprised to notice that there were absolutely no wounds on him, while his clothes were completely covered in blood, which forced her to make only one completely plausible. Grabbing the guy by his clothes, the angry girl became even more angry, telling him that she guessed that it was not his blood at all, even if he continued to remain silent. And the psycho was in no hurry to answer her, while his galas blushed even more, and everything around seemed to only turn black from the dark aura, which did not bode well, because Carl had clearly. Having calmed down, the lady sat down in front of him on the bed and put her hands on her knees, examining the guy's face and trying to calmly find out from him with whom exactly he had managed to fight. But the very thought that he had hurt someone excited the protagonist so much that everything around her began to blur, and the lady herself sat tensely and tried to calm herself down, although she knew that everything was not so. Remembering the original plot of the novel and imagining how Carl first met Estella, the lady recalled that he killed a man for the first time exactly when he met this aristocrat. When she removed the penchat that bound him, and then, in front of the owner of the Mana Stone, there appeared to be a completely ordinary guy with red eyes and black hair, who looked at her, listening to what she said, that he had a choice to leave her mansion or do something else. She looked at him, saying that he also had a choice to stay with her forever and help her physically and spiritually, as if to continue to be her subordinate. And in the story, Carl decided to stay with Estella, which made them look almost like a couple, when the cute, blue-haired girl was in a pink dress, and next to her was always the submissive Carl, also dressed almost like an Arab. But as it turned out, everything was not so good and wonderful, because one day, according to the plot, he still took up knives and killed. After such an event in history, there were bodies of people lying on the ground, as well as one blonde man, when near him was the tip of the bloody blade of the sword of Carl, who was. By doing this, he made Estella cry and be in the shadows, where the girl sobbed, albeit in a pink, beautiful dress, asking Carl what made him do such a terrible thing, as if considering him a monster. As he glanced at the sad and devastated Estella, he replied that he only wanted to check that he had become so sedentary, saying this with a sly and satisfied smile, as if everything he wanted had come true. Clenching his hand into a fist after he killed absolutely all the members of Estella's family, the guy with red, glowing eyes said that he would now kill all the magicians in the Empire. After he had. Yul remembered all this, realizing that this is exactly how the plot should be. But now she is sure that Carl committed his first murders quite recently, without even leaving the tower of. She looked down with her head down and looked at the floor, remembering about Carl's mana, which was limited like everyone else's, so he would hardly be able to use magic anywhere. But she was interrupted from her thoughts by the voice of a psychopath. She looked up at him and asked him, puzzled what he had just said, because she had not heard his question due to her deep thoughts. And then the guy replied that she had a rest about why she had not told him anything about rocks. The stunned girl looked at Carl and remembered the same guy who laughed at her and made dirty jokes when she alone decided to help the unconscious Carl, which is why she asked the psycho if he was dead. The red-eyed man with obvious but suspicious calm, even indifference, answered the girl that he did not yet know whether Rox was dead or alive, as if the state of the magician did not. Hearing this, the girl became even more excited, so much so that everything around her ceased to exist when she realized that if Carl really killed Rox, then the future that she knew was no longer the future, but just useless illusions. He was shocked. She got up from the bed and looked angrily at Carl, began to scold him and ask why he was behaving so disobediently, like a hooligan. The guy just looked into her eyes and began to calmly speak, saying that he knows perfectly well that she likes Lev, and he is also more than sure that she does not want him to die. But why the psycho decided to talk about this remains a. That's why she asked him in surprise why he decided to remember her friend with pink hair named Lev, not understanding Carl's train of thought at all, but becoming more and more alarmed by his words. In response, Carl only stood up, telling the exhausted and tense heroine that if Rox died, Lev would be chosen as the magician's partner, to which he asked if this was not the best. And when the crazy guy also asked the heroine if she thought that he would allow Roska to treat her so disrespectfully and vilely, the girl herself looked at his hands and realized she already wanted to raise her fist in order to hit Carl or fight him off out of fear. But at that moment, she thought that if he didn't have the handcuffs that bound his magic, then he could and she never managed to do what she had planned, because the guy with the bloody clothes grabbed the lady by the wrist, which surprised the lady even more. Coming even closer to her, he began to stare intently into Yul's eyes, still holding her hand to himself, which only made the girl remain silent in surprise. But with a sharp movement of her hand, Yul still forced the guy to let her go, after which she began to shout at him with displeasure, asking where he had put his handcuffs because the owner of the tower would be She looked at him indignantly, asking Carl if he knew what she had to do in order to get him out of prison, heal him and remove the curse from him, but the brunette remained silent, as if he did not want to quarrel. But what surprised Cal more was that the girl, full of hatred, in a fit of anger, told him that she had to beg the tower's owner on her knees to leave him alive, which is why she asked him if he wanted to ruin everything with his misdeeds. Not hearing an answer to all her questions and indignation, the blue-eyed girl decided to turn away from the guy and head towards the door, while the silent brunette was surprised by her behavior, but did not want to object to anything. Having already opened the door to leave, the girl turned to Cal for the last time and shouted that now she didn't care at all how exactly he would act, so let him do what he thought was necessary, because she no longer— However, she couldn't even take a couple of steps in the corridor, because right after she said goodbye to the guy and closed the door, a strange feeling came over her, which made her bend over, covering her mouth with her— Everything around her seemed to go dark as she looked at the floor and thought about Rox, thinking that if Cal had really killed him, then the future was already— But she covered her mouth with her hand in horror when she realized that all these changes had happened only because she had decided that day to help Cal, and not leave him to die, as the other magicians had done at that moment. And when the girl was sure that she would not do this again, Cal himself, in bloody clothes, was still standing in front of the bed, as if thinking about everything that Yule had told him in a fit of anger. His red eyes were shining again, as if from anger he was not angry with Yule with all his soul, because in fact he was looking at the door and was angry with himself, and with the fact that everything happened exactly like this, in the worst way for him. As a result, the girl was forced to spend the whole night in the classroom, because Mel was sleeping in her room, and in the morning she met Lev on her way, who had already greeted her. But the lady— He smiled at her warmly, showing his joy and positivity, and also asking his friend if she had been reading books all night, not even guessing what was on Yule's mind. The lady looked at him in surprise, noticing that today her friend was acting much happier than usual, which is why she began to examine his smile, asking if something good had happened to him. And as soon as the laughing Lev told his friend with a laugh that Rox had recently been gotten rid of, Yule, shocked by such news, looked at Lev with shock, not believing. He put his hand on his chest, smiling as he told the main character that thanks to this, when the magician comes, he will be able to leave this place immediately. And for him, this is a real relief, because he was very afraid that if they choose Rox, they will— Hearing this, the protagonist seriously thought about why everything around her disappeared again, while she tried to understand if there was still time to choose. But there was also what worries her the most. That's why she looked at Lev and asked him warily if Cal had killed Rox, as if all the worries and hopes for the best could be read in her voice, because she was afraid that her nightmare would turn out to be true. And as soon as the pink-haired guy heard that, he looked at the girl with the same sweet smile and asked her if she was talking about what happened last night. But Yule herself did not— Even adding to his words that he was very sorry, Lev said that Rox did not die, because he himself saw how the guards took him away and he was still breathing. But these words also made the lady surprised. Imagining Rox lying on the floor, completely covered in blood, Lev explained that Cal had beaten him into a pulp, and that he had then been carried away by guards for disposal as an object no longer of use to anyone. Remembering that creatures created by their black magic are very expensive, which is why the girl imagined herself surrounded by falling gold coins, the girl realized that Rox— And so, when the girl thought about the fact that the mages could only be disposed of if they were not matched, but not because of some kind of fight, she asked Lev if he knew why Cal had attacked Rox. He looked at her as if he already suspected something, because he remained silent, never answering the lady's question, which seemed very important to her, which Lev seemed to notice. But right after that, he still laughed as if nothing terrible had happened, also telling the heroine that a couple of days ago he casually told Cal about how Rox had hurt her and offended her with offensive jokes. As soon as the protagonist heard this, all the bright emotions disappeared from her face, and her soul seemed to sink into her heels as she looked at Lev in shock. She started yelling at him, telling him that it was pointless, but the pink-haired guy immediately interrupted her, saying that it wasn't because he wanted to fuck, looking at her with complete seriousness. Lev said that he wanted to leave this damned dark tower forever, over which even the clouds were gathering, in order to start living freely and without problems. And for this, and Lev himself, while being surrounded by chains, which he felt every day while in the building that bound him, told the girl that he did all this only in order to survive. He, imagining a bloody sword with a golden handle, told the surprised Yule that he was even ready to kill other people in order to stay alive, to leave the tower forever, to live like a human. Everything around them seemed to disappear when the hairy guy in front of the lady said that he was even ready to repeat all the murders if it would help him leave the tower, because he did not intend to worry about those who died because of his desires. He burst into tears, continuing to make excuses and telling his friend that if she wanted to hear why he decided to tell Cal about this, he would tell her that he just didn't want to. On the one hand, the girl could understand Lev's feelings and his actions, but she still remained calm, but surprised, asking the pink-haired guy what he would do if Cal was also disposed of. Because of him, the tearful Lev looked into her eyes. Gesturing with his hand, the guy admitted that he hadn't thought about it at all, which amazed the blue-haired lady. And he also said that if this happened, it would be even better for her personally. But when the guy started telling her that while Kal, who has the highest mana of all, will only make trash out of it, Yul couldn't stand it and walked forward from Lev, saying, having shown him her back, the girl with soft blue hair headed closer to the exit of the library, telling Lev in an empty voice that she was very tired and therefore would go and rest. But it was clear to him that the lady was clearly very— And so time passed in the tower, above which there was always a dark sky with clouds that emitted lightning every second, giving the already ominous building an incredible— A month passed after the mentioned events, and the main character spent all this time in her room, thinking about what was happening and not even intending to hear any news about the Kala. She also remembered how she had quarreled with him the last time, how she had yelled at him while he himself was surprised by what had happened and simply listened to her. And now the lady understood that after that incident he had become quiet, not creating— Yul imagined him, broken and devastated, not understanding whether he had decided to no longer resist and give in to the system, or whether he was planning something unknown. To some extent, the lady was right, because the guy was calmly in his cell and did nothing for days, because his thoughts were filled only with what had happened to Yul, and sometimes he still went to the door. He watched the people who no longer even remembered him, laughing and looking quite happy in such a gloomy place, making Kal understand that it seemed like everyone was well accustomed to the calm. Even the guards in such a terrible place for everyone, where every day someone could be killed or maimed, smiled as they walked along the corridors, telling each other all— But among all these happy people, only Kal and Yul were not deprived of joy. And that is why the guy was angry, realizing that he no longer wanted to be locked up in a cell. And with burning— The thing is that at the top of this tower, where there was a heavy downpour and it seemed that nothing was visible, there were already firearms and torches, as if something serious was brewing. However, for one security guard, the days were not so happy, because on one of his working days, he was clearly attacked, as he fell exhausted to the floor, while fresh blood continued to flow from his face and head. Hearing the noise, the alarmed magicians, among whom was the main character, decided to go towards the noise and see what was going on, while Yul's face became increasingly worried, and the first thing they saw near the wall was a tall and menacingly disposed Kal, around whom was the dark smoke of his magic. And he himself looked at the floor. His eyes seemed to always burn when he wanted to take out his anger and fury on someone else. So he looked with his red eyes at all those who looked at him with surprise and were afraid to move. The first to notice his emotions and clearly unfriendly attitude was Yul, who was horrified by this, opening her mouth and realizing that something bad would obviously happen if the psychopath again released his emotions into the— But besides Kal himself, the main character noticed Mel near his large body, who was shaking with fear and could not even raise her head to look at the psychopath, because she was also afraid of being among his victims. Unlike her, Yul was not afraid of Kal, because she knew him too well, which is why she was also not afraid to take his bloody hand, asking if this was his doing. The brunette looked at her and just remained silent. But this did not stop the lady, who looked at him and said that she absolutely did not care what exactly he had done here, because now— But she also fell silent, looking in surprise at her interlocutor, who was always laconic with her, because this time he told her that she had promised him to come. Which is why Yul— And while the protagonist was talking to her friend, everyone looked at them with genuine surprise, expecting the most nightmarish consequences, but hoping that Yul would be able to calm the psycho. When there was nothing around them, as if the lady saw only Kal in front of her, and he her, the guy said, And he looked at Yul with incredible anger, gritting his teeth from the emotions burning in his soul, telling the girl that she could behave as she wanted, and she didn't appear in his life. This frightened and amazed the main character, but did not make her move away, while other spectators of this event were already ready to run to their rooms out of fear that Call would do the same to them as he did to the guard. She decided to ask him again carefully what he had in mind this time, anticipating hearing the most terrible answer. But the guy only turned away from her, saying, at the very moment when Call said that he would do everything his own way, he looked at Mel, which made the girl with short hair turn away. But the blue-haired girl looked at her, noticing that everyone was clearly scared, but she still didn't understand what the brunette meant. And Call was wary, because with his red eyes, he looked at the one he hated most of all, and the one who had decided to interrupt all his plans with his presence and attention. And that person turned out to be the brown-haired owner of the tower, who laughed at his situation, telling everyone that there was quite a lot of noise here that needed to be eliminated, as if referring to Call. And while the main character did not understand why even the owner of the tower came here, she noticed in her own eyes how her friend was already starting to get incredibly angry. She even grabbed her head, feeling an unpleasant ringing because of the girl, and assumed that it was starting because her mage was responding to the magic of the psycho. However, she could not rely on this 100% either. But she clearly understood that she needed to calm Call down immediately, because she herself had allowed what had happened to him. Because she anxiously remembered how in the future, Call clearly wanted to take revenge on everyone for his captivity, which was evident from his readiness to attack, which amused the owner of the tower, who proudly raised his chin, looking at Call and watching her with obvious curiosity. That's why she immediately decided to tie him up and throw him to the ground, using her magic, which appeared in the air as black smoke, circling around the psycho's body, causing him to growl and not be able to move from the pain. The tower's owner, with his old dear smile, told the worried Yul that nothing bad would happen to her friend. But the guy's sweet behavior next to the girl only angered Call even more, who, despite all, before his eyes, he saw that the brown-haired guy dared to grab Yul by the shoulders and was talking to him with a smile, telling him that by resisting, he was only making things worse for himself. Taking a closer look at the face of the tower's owner, who was right next to her, Yul realized that the smiling guy did not want to stop the noise at all, but only wanted to punish Call and watch him suffer. Having decided that she herself should resolve everything, because Call would definitely stand his ground, the girl decided to approach the psycho and gently touch his cheeks with her palms, also telling, and at the moment when Yul promised him to leave this place forever, which was killing him not only from the outside but also from the inside, he hurried to hug her very tightly, wrapping his arms around her torso and resting his head on her shoulder. But he also whispered to her that it was impossible, as if in response, the main character only looked at him resolutely and even got angry, telling Call that of course it was possible, because in fact, thanks to the plot, she knew what would happen next. Call could not take his eyes off his girlfriend. As if in the midst of such darkness and malice, he saw an angel before him, who promised him the most precious thing in his life, in which he now believed most of all. He even imagined how he would be next to Yul and they would leave the tower together, when there was no one and nothing around, when the girl herself would say that he should believe her, because soon they would truly leave here. She knelt down in front of him when the guy himself was in no hurry to get up on his feet, because he looked the girl in the eyes when she asked him to believe her, and everyone around created a dead silence, because they themselves were surprised by what had happened. Yul said that now he just needs to calm down and be obedient, and also believe her words in order to definitely leave the tower forever, and not stay here for the rest of his life, receiving punishment. But the guy in front of her was so tired that he hurried to simply fall on her chest, which surprised the lady, while the brunette, it seemed, did not open his eyes anymore from extreme fatigue and power. She called him by name, but Call did not respond anymore because he had his eyes closed, Bucci in bloody clothes, as if he had decided to surrender. Even the guards were surprised that the always violent magician suddenly became affectionate, like a kitten with a girl. And so they would have continued to watch this miracle if the thing is that he ordered the guards to take Yul to the upper floor, while he would take Call himself, which alarmed the blue-haired lady, but she still obeyed, hoping that nothing bad would be done to the brunette. When the guard told her that she still needed to change clothes, she looked down and noticed bloodstains on her uniform, which were clearly transferred from the bloody Call. The brown-haired guy even smiled, looking at the main character and telling her that she would not be meeting important guests like this, so she needed to go to her cell and put on clean clothes. So he waved his hand and ordered his servants to take the protagonist upstairs and also bring her new clothes so that everything would go as quickly and without incident as possible. But even after the girl followed one of the guards, he turned around to see Kal being picked up and forced to leave to be cleaned up as well. And the guy himself, it seemed, no longer wanted to resist or do anything, because he walked with his head down in the direction where he was directed by two guards, who were also tasked with handing him over to— The brown-haired guy just clapped his hands and with a smile on his face told everyone else to go to their rooms to rest, because nothing critical had happened. But he said this because the two of them were already expecting a meeting with a magician, or rather, that same lady with blue hair and eyes, who would come to the tower in order to choose one partner for magic. This is what the main character was thinking about when she walked along the dark corridor surrounded by guards, because there was no joy on her face, but only quiet excitement for her future. However, as soon as she turned around, she saw behind her the pink-haired Leo, who was also looking at her with obvious emotion. Noticing that he first opened his mouth and then sadly closed it, lowered his head, the blue-haired lady immediately understood that he wanted to shout something after her, but never did. Which is why she decided to turn around, thinking about this situation with her eyes downcast and understanding that he clearly wanted to feel sorry for her, because he himself knew that she had weaker magic than Kal, which meant— But she herself could be very worried about this. But she knows the future, thanks to which, even when they put chains on her, she remained calm. And before her eyes, the girl saw the very gates through which Mrs. Estella was about to enter, who intended to choose the most powerful magician for her in order to use magic to its full potential. But she was interrupted from her thoughts by the voice of the guards and the appearance of the psychopath himself, who was deprived of the opportunity to scream and say anything, having a gag shoved into his— He stood before her as in that very prediction of the future that Yule saw in the past, because of which the girl was already preparing to see Mistress Estella in front of her. Yule fleetingly recalled how just a couple of hours ago she saw him in front of her, defenseless and incredibly calm, realizing that now there was no trace left of such a calm person. And when the owner of the tower also told everyone that Estella was about to enter here, the sounds of the gates opening were heard, which caused the curious girl to look ahead, wanting to see the aristocrat. Estella was already in the tower, and with calm, confident steps for the mistress, she walked, accompanied by guards, to the necessary room to see the strongest candidates for her magic and distant partnership. The blue-eyed girl in a luxurious blue dress is not just the owner of the Mana Stone, but also a member of an influential family, but also the main character of the world in which Yule found herself, which means that she is the center of everything. It was with these thoughts that Yule looked at the aristocrat, realizing that she had a completely different life with other people, and that she could even be envied. But the protagonist still did not want to try on someone else's role. She stood calmly before them as a bright light fell upon her, illuminating her like a savior who had come to the tower not only to choose a mate in magic, but also to— And her choice was not too long, because Estella briefly said that she would take both magicians for herself. The curious main character decided to turn around before leaving the tower forever. And in the darkness, she saw the smile of the owner of the dungeon, who seemed to look at her for the last time and followed. After some time, the old Geronia with Kal and the lady got into a luxurious white carriage in order to get to Estella's mansion. And before that, the aristocrat herself decided to get acquainted with her magicians, already preparing to start a conversation with them. And in the carriage itself, the protagonist was clearly thinking about something, because she did not understand why the owner of the tower let her go so easily, even smiling at her goodbye, as if everything was going just as it should. The thought that the tower's owner was clearly up to something was interrupted by Estella, who told the lady her name and said with a smile that she was glad to meet him. After Yule decided to say her name herself, also telling a little about Kal, because he clearly did not want to talk to anyone, Estella told everyone with a smile that she would consider them her friends. Clearly, sad thoughts filled the main character's mind due to the fact that their names literally meant their ordinal numbers in the hierarchy of power. More precisely, her second and first power of Kal. But she was surprised when the thing is that she was looking at an unusually beautiful palace under the blue sky, which was already visible from behind the thick trees and only sparkled because of its luxury. Yule was so surprised by the palace that at one point she even thought that she was in a fairy tale. while Kal remained silent and calm next to her. And she turned to them with a smile of joy and said that the first thing they would do was go inside so that the servants could not only change their clothes, while also telling her fellow mages that she would remove the binding seal from them so that they could use their magic to its full potential. She also looked at Kal, who remained bound and silent. And Yule herself thought that her role as assistant and healer for Kal was over, thanks to which they could separate from each other. But when she thought about it, she looked at the aristocrat also noticed the strange behavior, which is why she smiled sheepishly and feignedly, asking Kal if he would like to enter her palace if he was silent and he never answered Estella, which created a silence and stillness in the carriage as the red-eyed boy still didn't want to open up to new people, and the main character waited for him to be able to say at least a word. At that moment, the girl realized that it would be strange if Kal immediately began to trust Estella, but she still did not understand why But the aristocrat in front of them continued to speak anyway, placing her hand on her chest and telling the boy and girl that even if they didn't trust her with the binding seal, she would still remove it. The carriage was already approaching the luxurious, gilded palace when Estella talked to the couple and tried to calm them down. Speaking angrily, the aristocrat Estella even assured her new acquaintances that she would support them in everything, which she swears by her heart, saying that even if they want to leave her palace, and when she asked Kal and Yule what exactly they wanted, Prala did not answer her star, because the protagonist was looking. Yule realized that from that moment on, she definitely does not play her original role, if the heroine of the novel asks her even about her own choice. But she remembered who exactly the bloodthirsty Kal should become in the future, and realized that she continued to think, imagining Kal as a villain and recalling that according to the plot, he should stay with Estella when in the future he can accumulate magical power to looking at her hand with exactly the same sadness as Kal, the lady realized that, unlike him, she had no one to take revenge on, because first of all, she wanted a quiet life for herself, not in the circle of Aristotle and shocking stories. But she felt strangely how Kal was looking at her intently, as if he expected to hear her answer regarding the future most of all. But at that time, the heroine herself was thinking that if she learned to master her magic, she could very well live on her own. Yule smiled shyly, realizing that Kal was still waiting for an answer from her, because it was clearly important to him. But the protagonist was worried, which is why 2 noticeable drops of sweat were running down her face. Without hearing a definitive answer to what kind of future the couple wanted for themselves, the aristocrat Estella raised her finger to her lips and said the thing is that she clapped her hands sweetly and told everyone with a smile that she wanted to become friends with everyone as soon as possible. But Kal and Yule did not reciprocate her feelings, and the brunette continued to react to But Estella, without thinking about anything, looked at everyone with a smile and also told Yule that it seemed that Kal would follow her choice. So she wanted to hear her opinion regarding the future, and while the heroine herself was sure that this was not at all the case, because the brunette had a completely different fate than hers, Kal really looked at her and waited for an answer, which was very important to him. At that moment, the excited Yule wondered what was happening now, and remembered how she had been with Kal since childhood and even slept with him on the floor opposite. But she clearly understood that imagining in her mind the red eyes of her friend, which can often be seen when he is angry and furious, the lady could not believe that this had happened, because she clearly saw in him only a cruel. She also remembered how she stayed with him until the very end when he was unconscious and doing something on the floor, which made the girl ask herself if it was because she decided to help him and not stand aside. Yule closed her eyes to think about it more deeply, which is why she began to think that Kal clearly couldn't have gotten attached to her just because of this, although she couldn't strictly rule that out either. But she was more interested, but the aristocrat Estella was still thirsty for an answer from Yule, so she looked at her sweetly and smiled, asking affectionately if she. Imagining Kal in an expensive dark suit next to Estella, the protagonist understood that she absolutely did not care whether he would be with her further, because she was not the central character in the story. And when she imagined how he was already following her, which made the lady in the hood clearly uncomfortable, Yule realized that she did not. Sighing and angrily tilting her head down, the girl realized that there was nothing good about being always close to the main. But as soon as she opened her eyes, she saw that the red-eyed Kal was still watching her and still waiting for an answer, which made her understand that if this continued, she would definitely not be able to stand this atmosphere. And also, Estella was looking at her smiling, which is why Yule first told her to listen more carefully before making any conclusions, as if she wanted the noble person to understand her. Having told the girl with blue eyes that she was very tired now and therefore could not make a decision, Yule continued to feel the brunette's gaze on her, who was examining her face and only wanted to go with her where she was going. Also asking Estella if we could talk about this tomorrow, the protagonist already felt like she would now get out of the carriage and again be surprised by the huge structure in front of her. But even when she found herself in the mansion and got comfortable there, meeting the maids who led her to their room, she noticed a silent call next to her, who did not even look at her when the lady was in. Sitting down on the lady's bed, he began to look at her and say, "Didn't she say earlier that she would stay here or leave here?" But when the surprised girl looked, she just grabbed her head, realizing that it would always be difficult for her to talk to a silent man. And she also decided to ask him a question regarding why he continued to pursue her even here. And as in previous times, the brunette did not answer her with anything, as if he himself could not answer all these questions, because of which Yule only looked at the guy who calmly looked into her face. In the end, she decided to turn away from him and head for the door, shouting that she would go wash herself for now if he planned to sit here all day. And for that, the girl only received a piercing look from Call in her direction. Already being in a rich, bright palace with large windows, lush trees underneath, and incredible exterior elements, Yule understood that she wanted to escape from here, and therefore was already planning a secret escape. She herself did not notice how, with the completion of all her affairs, the day came to an end, because of which only moonlight illuminated everything around on the street, and there was no light in any of the windows, because everyone went, and the protagonist was getting ready for bed, because after she took her bath, she changed into a cute pink nightgown, which was perfect for lying down in a soft bed for the first time and enjoying sleep in her own room. However, as she walked along the dark corridor and thought about how dangerous it was for her to stay here with Call, who would definitely want to kill everyone in the palace at any moment, as it was in the original, she suddenly heard a guy's voice behind her, which made her shudder. And as soon as she turned around, she noticed not Call, who was always following her, but a charismatic blonde man with blue eyes, who smiled at her and asked where she was going at such a late hour. Noticing two moles under the blonde's eye, the girl immediately realized that this guy was Estella's father's personal magician named Fernand, which is why she imagined him with a But also, thanks to the fact that Yule knows the plot very well, she remembered that the blonde is also the one who became addicted to the main character, Estella, and his name is Leanthus, whom the lady imagined not just smiling, but smiling, because he was looking at the beauty of the aristocrat Estella, and even touched her blue lock of hair. He approached her with a smile and told her to say that if she found something interesting, then he would go after her at such a late hour. But when Yule herself looked at him, she could not believe that he was the same age, and Leanthus continued to smile at her, asking why she was looking at him so disapprovingly. But the protagonist thought that she definitely did not want to deal with the Thai gentleman, so she turned around and calmly began to walk further down the corridor, which angered and upset Leanthus, who began to ask the old woman where she was going and what had happened. The blue-eyed handsome man continued to stand, hoping that the girl would turn around and look at him, also asking her if she would really leave him, asking again if she wanted. And when the guy started talking about how he allegedly heard that she was very close to his girlfriend, the lady, angry at him, replied that it was not so. He also said that even if she wanted to leave, she would not be able to do so. And when the lady turned to him, asking why he decided so, the blonde showed her his index finger, saying that Estelle, and she imagined herself next to Cal when Lianis told her that she was connected to the psychopath not only by fate, friendship, and the fact that they lived in the tower, but also by magic, which is incredibly strong and useful. When Yule realized that it was because her magic was connected to Cal that she felt strange in the past, the lady imagined herself with the already dark and sinister, like a real villain, psychopath. When the blonde, as soon as the heroine heard this, she immediately felt as if she was surrounded by the very chains that had previously bound her in the tower, because the excitement and anxiety made her remember those very feelings that were binding her. But when she was thinking about this, she didn't notice how Lianis appeared right in front of her and put his hand on her chest, telling her with a smile that if she really wanted to learn, having also said that he would do it for a good price, he smiled at his new acquaintance, saying that this was the best option for her, as if Yule had no other choice. After that, he told the girl to think about this offer very carefully, as if he really wanted to help her. And only then did he leave the lady alone. The blonde was right in his words, because the blue-haired lady was unable to sleep only because of the meeting with the suspicious and smiling blonde in the corridor. However, as soon as she heard strange, loud sounds in the corridor and left her bedroom, she saw in front of her how one of the maids was she was shaking with fear and could not even pronounce words. So she begged Karl to forgive her. But Yule herself did not understand what exactly she had done and what had happened, and that was why she wanted to intervene. She looked at this picture with surprise and a dropped jaw, not understanding what the Karl had done this time. That already on the second day of his stay in the palace, a frightened servant appeared before him. Noticing that Karl didn't even lift a finger when the girl was kneeling in front of him and apologizing for something, she shouted his name in displeasure, which made not only the psychopath turn around, but also the maid. Looking at the guy with indignation and discontent, the blue-haired girl came closer to the brunette and asked what he had already done since the morning, intending to stop the misunderstanding. But Karl, like the previous times, only turned away from the main character and began to look at the maid again without saying a word. Which is why Yule understood that the brunette, she was indignant, asking the guy again what he was doing and what had happened. But he calmly answered her that the maid had only touched him, which is why she was now apologizing to him on her knee. She remembered that this guy was always angry when the guards touched him and chained him up. Yule realized that Karl just had that kind of character, and the maid didn't know about such nuances. That's why she remained calm, asking the maid what part of the topic she touched on. But she didn't answer, but began to stutter out of fear, trying to utter at least a couple of words in front of the psycho and Yule. And instead of answering the question, the maid began to remember how she saw Karl sleeping in bed, and she also began to tell Yule that he was unusually beautiful, to such an extent that she wanted to touch him. However, as soon as she said this, Karl became even more angry with her, which seemed to make everything darken and his eyes glow even brighter as he ordered the maid. Watching the whole situation, the blue-haired protagonist realized that things wouldn't go this way, which surprised her so she decided to just grab Karl by the shirt and drag him into the room to talk to him alone, while the guy himself did not resist and was more than balanced. And as soon as she entered Karl's bedroom, the first thing she noticed was not just things scattered across the floor and furniture, but a real mess, because even the chair was lying on the floor, the nightstands were overturned, and the carpets were crumpled. Realizing that the mess only appeared because Karl rebelled when the maid dared to touch him, the girl decided to ask him if he could at least clean up here. But she was surprised. Remembering the touches, the brunette also remembered how Yule had previously taken care of him and touched his body because she wanted to remove the gag. But he remembered this. That's why he now looked down in embarrassment, looking at the floor and telling the girl that he had previously been sure that touching was terrible for him. But now he realized that he only hated being touched by anyone he disliked even a little. And also, when he looked at the main character and noticed her very surprised face, he said that he also considered her very strange. But at that time, Yule only looked at him with her lips slightly open. Because of the words about strangeness, the guy remembered those very moments from childhood, when they were both in the pouring rain, when they were still small, homeless children. And now the brunette looks at her, just like that time, thinking that in front of him is not just a lady with blue hair and clear principles, but also distinguished by features that catch his attention and make him think. There was no longer any anger in his red eyes, especially when he looked at Yule, because he subconsciously knew that she did not. But Yule still didn't understand the train of his thoughts, and so she looked at him with obvious contempt and misunderstanding, asking what he was talking about and why so suddenly, since she didn't even know what she was indignant, asking the guy how she could find out anything or show off if he was constantly silent and talking nonsense. But this time, when in front of her was a black-haired guy with bright and interesting red eyes, the lady again understood that he was just looking at her like a real psycho. Therefore, the protagonist only turned away from Karl with displeasure, telling him that she also takes silence as an answer, and therefore intends to go out into the corridor to the. However, Karl himself did not allow her to leave the bedroom. His hand had quietly appeared on the lady's hand when she was, and also telling the main character that it was very dangerous here. The guy not only took the protagonist's hand, but also pressed her to himself from behind, even though Yule knew that there were all sorts of sharp shards of glass and various objects lying on the floor. Then she started shouting at him, asking what he wanted, and also asking why he wouldn't let her go. When Karl still didn't want to let go of her hand for the reason that he was afraid of hurting the lady with the shards that were now dangerously lying on the floor because of him. However, as soon as she raised her head to Call's face, the lady immediately fell silent because the guy turned out to be incredibly handsome, which is why she began to think that but the protagonist did not expect at all that when she would yell at the guy again and ask him to let her go, Estella would enter their room. She immediately started running towards the exit with shame, shouting to the couple that she was really sorry that she decided to disturb their privacy. But Yule shouted after her, but it was too late to explain anything, which is why the door to Call's bedroom slammed shut just as quickly as before. Which is why the guy and the main character silently, because she looked at the door in surprise and did not understand what had happened to Estella, as if she found something strange in her behavior. But then Call told her that he often saw that she was completely slow-witted in understandable situations, after which the couple nevertheless went to the luxurious refectory. And while Call, in an aristocratic dark suit, sat right next to Yule and watched her every reaction, but the heroine still had to turn away from the table, because in front of her she saw smiling Estella and Leanthus, who was holding the gentleman's hand while the lady was saying with joy that they had come first for breakfast. At that moment, the blonde smiled at Yule as if he had already had some unknown connection with her, which was true, because he, like no one else, knows. But this only made Yule shut up and look at the friendly blonde with an empty face, while everything around her seemed to darken, because she did not want to have such suspicious attention from a barely familiar man. And while the girl did not understand why exactly Leanthus decided to look at her like that, her anxiety and anger were noticed by Call, who could not miss. Call quickly realized that Yule had an aversion to the blonde, and only this made him look at Leanthus with an unkind look, when his eyes lit up with anger, and he was ready to do anything if this same blonde. But after breakfast went well and nothing terrible happened, the blue-haired lady still thought about the past, thought about how she hadn't been able to eat anything because she had no appetite, and also that she had met an important person at breakfast, and she ate in front of Fernand, or rather, Estella's father, who is also a positive hero in the novella, which is why he appeared before everyone as a kind, bright, and smiling gentleman with good intentions. However, when she noticed the silent Call in her room again, she decided to get up from the bed she was lying on earlier, looking at the guy and asking him what he was doing here. Because earlier, Yule was referring to the moment when she was at a banquet with Call, and when they both looked at one person, who in turn told Estella that if these two mages were her property, she should come up with new names for them. But when Estella confessed to her father that she didn't even know yet whether Call and Yule would stay in the house, he was surprised, looking at the couple who immediately turned away from each other, looking at something other than themselves. And the blonde and Estella felt a little uncomfortable, so they began to smile sweetly and remain silent. And Leanthus himself looked at the couple and did not stop doing this, which looked more than strange. Now, when Yule remembered that the gentlemen were looking at her, as if she wanted to say something, but at that moment Leanthus took her away from everyone. Trampling, the protagonist realized that she clearly wanted to ask them again about whether they wanted to stay in the mansion. Therefore, looking at Call now, the lady asked him personally about what she intended to do next, and whether she planned to stay, to which the psycho responded with a question, asking the hero. She wanted to be indignant once again, saying that she asked him about it first, but decided not to do so, and only sighed, angrily telling him to forget it and not to tell her anything else. When she and other nobles were in a luxurious palace, which was only decorated by the sun, the girl confessed to Call that she would stay here, which also meant that the psychopath would follow her choice. And she made such a choice because she imagined the sinister Call in her head as an antagonist, and realized that now they were connected, but he could find her anywhere with the help of magic. And therefore she must learn strong spells so as not to. She also remembered the mysterious Leanthus, who had smiled at her earlier and offered his help, but the lady had never answered him, because she wanted to know his intentions and secret plans. However, remembering that Estella could also create glowing magic in her hands, Yule realized that she did not need to turn to anyone else, because Estella herself had a spell that she could teach. But she was interrupted from her thoughts by Call's displeased look and voice, because he looked at her with obvious rage and asked if she wasn't embarrassed by the fact that she would live here as the personal dog of a magician. The girl was outraged by such words, imagining Estella with outstretched arms, telling Call that it was she who gave them the choice of freedom, and also freed them from the seal, and they're imagining how they themselves, when they were still in the form of prisoners in the tower, would appear before the world as the chains were broken around them. Yule honestly challenged Call if he thought she would use them as her partners. The calm girl with pink eyes replied that she did not think so, and that was why she decided to stay here. And she told Call himself that no one was holding him here. So if he did not want to be in the palace, he could leave. The guy in dark clothes continued to stand in the beautiful bedroom when the lady explained to him that the food here was also beautiful and delicious. So he would not rush to give up all this just to start living the way he wanted. He just listened to her attentively and remained silent when Yule told him to do as he thought best. Because in reality, the girl doesn't know if everything is okay if Call leaves the mansion. Remembering that she had found herself in a novel that was literally written with a red pen, the girl realized that if Call left the palace, the future would definitely change. Although the lady had already, she even imagined Estella's parents and herself living happily together and talking to each other, knowing that even if Cal left, it would be better for the lady. And she did not forget about Cal himself because she imagined him very sad, but with a bloody sword, realizing that if he did not decide to stay in the palace, he would not become a terrible villain who would bring sin to the whole world. Imagining him clearly happy, looking at a certain blonde with golden hair, you'll realize that she was doing the best for him and others, and not what was described in the original plot. Now, looking at that guy who was admiring the view from the window and was a little sad, she didn't understand what made Call constantly come to her room and just stand there, and she even thought that if it was only because of the window. Noticing the change in Call's mood, or rather the fact that he began to look with anger at what he saw in the window, the girl decided to get up and look at what the guy was so angry about. What really angered Call was an ordinary carriage that stopped right in front of the main entrance to the palace, as if an important person was about to get out of it. And regarding this, the psychopath turned out to be right. Because Alec came out of it, in whom Yule immediately recognized one of the most important characters in the novel, who owns the northern territories of the world and is also one of Estella's gentlemen, being in love. But Call got even more angry when Yule calmly began to say in his presence that the aristocrat turned out to be very handsome in appearance, and even normal in appearance. But she did not notice However, she was in no hurry to consider Alex completely ideal, because thanks to the plot, she knew that in the future, he would love Estella so much that The lady also noticed that Call suddenly closed the curtains, as if wanting the girl to stop looking at Alex. But when he became silent without explaining anything, she again pulled the curtains back, saying that remembering the blonde Leanthus, who always smiles, the girl realized that only a week had passed since she and Call had entered the palace, but during that time she had already managed to see several of the main characters. Among them was Alex, whom the girl saw now, imagining him not as cheerful and charismatic as Leanthus, because he clearly had serious intentions and was a stricter person than some. Having imagined Call himself in a luxurious dark-colored uniform, the girl realized that she felt uneasy when she saw in real life those people whom she had only imagined in her head when she read the novel in her past. But now, when she decided to look at Call, who also began to look at her intently, the girl forced herself to look in a new way at the world that had previously seemed fictional and inaccessible. A fairy tale. Looking at the room with a rich interior, the lady decided to ask Call, who was suspicious of his actions, why he kept coming to her. Also realizing that she clearly didn't know a lot of things if the guy turned out to be a little different from what But he only asked Yule what it meant when the lady looking at him began to get angry for the umpteenth time, telling the psychopath that he was constantly bothering her, which is why she was asking why he was constantly stalking her. However, Call suddenly started talking and even responded, embarrassedly lowering his galash to the floor when the sunlight fell on him, telling Yule that if he didn't do this, she wouldn't even pay attention to him. Recalling how the girl left his room in prison, saying that she would never come to him again, the psychopath said that thanks to this incident, he realized that she would truly not touch him anymore, so he decided to come to her himself. But when the surprised girl, who thought that he was acting almost like a child because he was offended by her, asked if he slept well, which made the brunette angry, telling Yule not to change the subject. In response, she began to only gesture with her hand and tell the guy that it doesn't change her at all, but wants to ask why he doesn't eat anything and doesn't even sleep, Asking him if he wants to die because of such careless. Unable to bear it, the main character decided that she would solve at least one of Cal's problems herself, and so she grabbed his hand and dragged him to her bed. Having forced him to sit down on the bed by the lady gently pushing him back, Yule looked at the one who was softly indignant, asking the lady what she was doing, as if he had detected but the blue-haired lady told him that she did not wish him any harm, but merely ordered him to sleep on her bed until he got enough sleep, while Tony also extended her hand to him. And after the guy actually found himself under the red blanket, the girl began to calmly look at him, saying that her task was only to monitor his sleep, to check whether he was sleeping, because now she was seriously taking care. The efforts of the main character were not in vain, because after some time, when she did not make noise but simply sat next to Cal, she noticed that the brunette really turned over on his side and fell asleep very. She began to look at him like an exhibit in a museum, thinking that he looked as stupid and cute as possible at the same time, realizing that the main character herself did not notice how she also began to feel sleepy, which is why she wanted to lie down on the bed next to Cal. But what was her surprise when she woke up and sat up, realizing that she was in a complete. She looked in shock at the unfamiliar interior, which turned out to be even richer than in the palace. Not understanding absolutely anything, she looked at the burning fireplace with a shocked face, emitting not only light but also warmth, while there was a table with chairs next to it, and a beautiful painting on the wall. But the girl quickly realized that she would achieve nothing if she gave in to her emotions, so she put on a serious face in order to Getting out of bed and starting to look around, the lady realized that the room was not only filled with fancy furniture, but was also 3 times larger in size than in Estella's palace, which amazed her more and more. But when she thought about the fact that the owner of this room was definitely a rich man or a high-level aristocrat, she turned her head to the very gentleman she was thinking about, because he was the owner of all the luxury in the room and not only. And what was the heroine's surprise when she saw in front of her a blonde man with incredibly light skin and hair, who was holding a towel in his hands and wiping his face with it with incredible calm, while he was wearing a robe, as the main character instantly turned away from him out of shame and blushed, with incredible shock guessing who this gentleman was, and why at that very moment he. However, she still turned to him with suspicion and hostility when she heard the blonde calmly say that he knew that she was Estella's mate and her personal mage, which made Yule look, and he smiled at her as if he was not at all surprised by a stranger in his palace. He asked what she was doing here, as if the heroine herself would be able to answer him this. The first thing, the girl with long hair and in a cute nightgown asked the guy what kind of place it was. But he only began to look at her with the same smile, telling her to come closer, when the angry Yule answered the stranger that he could come up to her himself, because she would not take even one step in his direction. The gentleman briefly imagined that. Calmly and even menacingly looking at the lady, the guy said that he didn't know at all what was going on in the tower and what the rules were. But with such words, he hinted to the girl that she had ended up in another world, and she needed to get used. While Yule looked at him and the guy calmly sat down on the sofa and seemed to want the girl to do the same, he said with a smile that this world is completely different and there are. The master's words made her remember Cal, who is a more vivid example of a difficult character than herself, because she had seen him angry, dissatisfied. However, that was not all, because when the heroine remembered Cal, a guy she did not know suddenly came up to her so close that he began to touch her face with his hand, saying that he really wanted to do it. When the lady began to be indignant and asked the aristocrat what he was doing, he replied that he was now seeing in front of him not just a girl, but her mana energy, which was flowing in her body. And the blonde's words greatly surprised the opponent. When he saw only the silhouette of a girl in front of him, which looked more like smoke, he said that he really saw a white cloud in front of him, imbued with magic, which is what makes her special. And so now, when the guy with the dazzling appearance looked at the girl with a smile, he asked if he could cross the line a little in their acquaintance if he found her a very interesting and fascinating person, as if him. But imagine Yule's surprise when the guy not only told her about her magic, but also admitted that she was very similar to Estella, whom he remembered, saying that it was precise. This really turned out to be true, because at that moment, when he touched the lady's face with his hand, he saw more and more of Estella's features in her, which fascinated him, and Yule still looked at him in shock. However, the real shock for the protagonist came when the aristocrat with the ulka told her that she was currently in the imperial palace, which caused the lady to immediately imagine him in a majestic and beautiful image, surrounded by the darkness of the night. In addition, the guy with the snow-white appearance also said that Yule was now in his bedroom, which is why she looked around, noticing more and more rich and aristocratic furniture that she had not seen before. She immediately imagined in her mind a beautiful golden crown for the emperors, realizing that if she excluded the relatives of the imperial family that she herself knew, only the emperor and the crown prince remained. Also realizing that he knew the appearance of the crown prince very well, thanks to which he realized that it was not him he was seeing in front of him, Layli asked the already surprised. Hearing the girl's words, the guy was so surprised at first that he stopped saying anything, because Yule's words made him laugh and amaze him so much at the same time that he was ready to look at her as if she. However, after the couple decided to calmly talk at the table and cups of tea, the guy laughing at Yule's words answered that to her regret or happiness, he is not an emperor. But the heroine was indignant. Looking at the lady with a smile, he said that he was the half-brother of the crown prince and his name was Christian, which made Yule even more surprised, realizing that he was waving a secret person. Remembering the future villain Call, the girl realized that she had not been able to recognize him earlier because she was focused not only on the plot itself, but also on the main characters. And there was no. The plot really revolves only around the main character Estella, who is always surrounded by her admirers and the most influential, charming aristocrats, while much less time is devoted to everyone else. The guy also made the lady remember the light, green magic in the form of a magic circle, telling her that she got here because of the spell of movement, which surprised Yule even more, who had not known such a miracle until that moment. She looked at him in amazement and asked if that was really the case, to which the guy replied that she could be sure of it because he knew more about this than anyone else. Remembering Estella's beautiful palace, the aristocrat began to tell that long ago, when he visited it in those bright and unforgettable times. But together with Estella, they played and looked very happy, although they were not even aware of the glowing circle, that it had all the necessary charms and could really move people from one space to another. As they both looked at the cup of tea, illuminated only by the dim moonlight, Christina explained that since she was not trained in magic, she would not be able to get back to the palace using the same method now, and therefore she would have to spend the night with him tonight. Smiling at the main character, Christian admitted that he could not explain why she could use the magic of movement and get into his bedroom. But if he could not activate them, then the prince remembered her beautiful palace, like from a fairy tale, over which the morning sun had already risen and under which the carriage was being prepared for the main character. But when Yule was trying to figure out why he shouldn't use his magic of movement, if he could create a magic circle even as a child, the prince suddenly raised his hand to his face and answered sadly that he had lost his magic a long time ago. In front of her sat a blond man, saddened by his fate, who was the eldest son in the family. But it was not he who became the crown prince, but his brother. She thought that the magicians from the tower could cure the blind prince and restore his sight with 2 clicks of a finger. But the guy seemed to read Yule's thoughts and said that his magic, and Yule sat quietly on the sofa in front of him and was silent when the sad prince changed the subject of the conversation, cheerfully telling her that tomorrow he would prepare. The protagonist also became sad, looking at the tea on the table and not fully why she was teleported here. Whether it is considered some kind of sign of fate, or is it a simple coincidence? The bedroom was quiet and dark, but it still contained aristocratic elements and decor, which the prince admired, telling his guests that it was. But when the perplexed lady asked the gentleman if this was his bedroom and where he would sleep in that case, the blond man just smiled at her as if she had thought. Laughing once again, he asked again why Yule was so worried about this. But the indignant girl replied that she had heard him perfectly well, but that this was his bedroom, so she wasn't sure. Already approaching the door to go out, the guy answered with a smile that Yule need not worry about him because he would sleep in the next room so as not to disturb her anymore. However, when he opened the door and the lady saw that there was absolutely no furniture in the room, Yule asked the prince in surprise if he was going to sleep on the floor in a room that he himself called empty. But the prince seemed to have only one answer to everything, because he laughed again and told Yule not to worry about him, while the protagonist herself was not going to leave it all just like that. She looked at him and said so, like she was far from being too concerned about the well-being and comfort of the Prince of the Empire, because she wanted him to sleep in his bedroom on the bed. And while the prince smiled and laughed sweetly, indignantly telling the girl that everything was fine, She didn't even listen to him, because she silently headed into the empty room to. Right there, she simply fell to the floor and had no intention of getting up, silently preparing to fall asleep, when Christian, who was nearby, looked at her. He looked at her with a barking scowl when the girl indignantly admitted that she did not want to go to jail because she was using his property, so she wanted to sleep on the floor, which she could no longer be convinced of. But after that, he smiled sweetly, because the lady unknown to him turned out to be much more interesting and funnier than he expected, and she was even able to lift his spirits, making him forget about the usual routine and work. Yul was left to sleep on the floor, which is why the very next day she was already in the carriage and riding to Estella's palace when the white imperial horse. While in the carriage, the girl remembered how the prince personally prepared her for departure. When they both left the luxurious and large castle, he put a hidden brown cape on the main character while saying that now, if she had any problems or needed his personal help, she could contact him without hesitation. And he smiled, wishing the protagonist a safe journey home. But Deli saw in him not just kindness, but this is exactly what the girl was thinking about now. As she sat in the carriage, realizing that she could not even guarantee her own safety, and that she could avoid such meetings with the heroes of the night. Remembering Call, Yul realized that even if she gave in to the desire and ran away from the palace right now, the psychopath would find her thanks to the spell that bound them together. However, as soon as she left the carriage and walked a little closer to the palace, she noticed in shock that it was all covered with an unusually dark cloud of purple magic, as if the worst was just beginning. She looked at the magic and the palace itself in shock, not understanding what had already happened during her absence and whether she was to blame for it. But Yul had not suspected before, and this man turned out to be Call, who was already waiting for the protagonist at the entrance to the palace and looked at her with extraordinary anger. Because as soon as she entered the palace with Call, which turned out to be no less dark inside than outside due to the evil psychopath, the blonde lady with the same anger, the guy with black eyes, incredible anger and resentment towards Yul leaned towards her, ordering her to speak and explain everything that had happened to her. While the pro-Atgnoist herself stared at him in shock and could not find. With burning eyes, he asked the lady what was going on in her head, asking such a strange question again and again, which made the girl unable to understand what was happening to him and why. And when Yul, who had begun to be genuinely afraid of Call, asked him what he meant, he only began to laugh maniacally and touch his face, saying that he should have. They were both already near the ruined palace, which was still saturated with Call's magic. And the heroine herself thought that she did not understand the guy's anger at all, but she immediately realized that for now she needed to resolve all the misunderstandings between Call. So she decided to ask him about what kind of vigilance he was telling her. Considering it nonsense and not suspect, the guy in front of her indignantly accused Yul of being able to use magic and actually hiding it all the time. But the blue-haired lady was more indignant, saying that it was all a misunderstanding. Call remembered how he woke up after a dream and realized that Yul was no longer in the red bedroom. So now he asks her how she was able to leave the palace without leaving any traces and using the magic of. The calm lady replied that she herself did not know how it happened, because she herself did not notice how she closed her eyes, and therefore found herself in the bedroom of a. The black-haired guy couldn't calm down, and that's why he was getting angrier and angrier, asking the girl who Christian was, as if she were being interrogated. And his main emotions were not just rage or anger, but jealousy. Suddenly, a heavy downpour began, and it was at this moment that the girl decided to look at Call and tell him that in any case she did not intend to leave the palace of her own free will at this particular time. And Call listened to her in silence when he was soaking wet, but still looked at Yul with anger when she tried to convince him that everything happened by accident, and she was not trying to The girl Lei took him by the hand and asked him to enter the palace, which is why Call gradually cooled down from the rage that began only because he did not see his familiar Yul next to him, who was almost the most. Already in the palace itself, Estella was waiting for Yul, who approached her anxiously and asked if she was okay, also saying that she was very sorry that everything happened exactly this. Having explained to the heroine that she could not immediately return to the palace because she was receiving permission to use magic, Estella begged Yul to forgive her. But the curious Yul no longer succumbed to anxiety and felt great. So she smiled sweetly, looking at Estella and telling her that everything was fine now. And she also wanted to ask her about some permission for magic, which she heard for the first time in her life. But it was not Estella who answered her. but Alex, who happened to be nearby and began to say that if she wanted to use more of her magic, she would need to get special permission for this from the— Looking at the heroine with his golden eyes, Alex said that right now a lot of mana was needed. That's why Estella went to the Emperor for permission. But the heroine herself thought that this man had been here for a long time, and when Alex found himself next to Estella and began to cough into his hand, the lady said that she intended to fix the entire damaged palace with her magic, for which she had received permission. When the lady realized that Estella herself intended to repair the palace, she asked everyone what had happened, which caused Alex to look at her askance, who in response asked why she still didn't know about everything. Only the man's words about what she knows and what she doesn't made Yule look at Alex in surprise and seriously think about what else she has to learn in this world. And her own thoughts led the main character to the image of that very brunette who cannot control his emotions, and especially hatred with rage, because of which not only he himself, but now Alex in front of her still remained dissatisfied with him, indignant, looking at Yule and telling her that if she really doesn't know, then she'll tell him. But instead of doing— And at that moment, Estella looked at him as if she ordered him not to tell anything that Yule personally did not need to hear, which is why Alex fell silent, not intending to tell anything more to the— In front of her was still a man in a strict dark suit, who was now saying that there was nothing wrong with his story, so he didn't need to explain anything. But Yule still looked at him with indignation, and when she wanted to tell everyone around that she didn't understand anything, suddenly a dark-haired Call appeared next to her, who leaned slightly towards her and looked straight into her eyes. Then, when the guy demonstratively stopped near Yule, it made everyone fall silent and made the atmosphere between them more and more tense, suspicious, and uncomfortable. And thanks to the atmosphere in which Estella sighed and Alex simply remained silent, the girl looked at the black-eyed brunette and understood that it was because of him that the palace had collapsed. And while the girl did not understand why everyone was hiding something, Estella decided to look at her with alarm, saying that she was sure that she was very scared when she— Remembering about the magic circle that was in the bedroom, Estella admitted that she knew about its existence. But for 5 years, no one had been able to activate it, which is why she did not even— And when Alex and Estella looked at Yule, she said that in that case, they would go about their business. And in response, the lady told them that she was not at all scared, and she did not need to apologize for such a trifle. After that, Estella wished the main character to have a good rest, and the girl listened to her friend's advice, because when she was in a beautiful palace over which there were green foliage, she decided to sleep. But as soon as she woke up, she immediately felt an unprecedented relief. That's why she stretched after sleep, yawned, and also thought about whether Estella was going to completely repair the palace, as she herself had said earlier. However, she was slightly surprised, but not the least bit scared when she noticed a person she was already accustomed to near her bed, namely Call, who, as it turned out, had been watching her all this time while she was sleeping. And now he was simply staring at her and silent. Because of this series, the lady remembered the guy that only because of the incident with the maid, who touched Call and then began to beg him for forgiveness on her knees, they were both moved to a separate building, where now she calmly looks at the brunette who seems to be looking at something completely different from her and thinks, is this psychopath really watching her all this time so that she doesn't disappear from his— However, after the girl heard knocks on the door and Estella's voice, she quickly realized that she needed to get dressed. So she put on a cute blue and white dress, and Call continued to silently look at them when they talked about their health, about how they had rested. And also Estella asked Yule if it was comfortable for her to sleep in the new room, to which the lady— Suddenly, Estella confessed that she had something for them, and therefore she asked them to go with her, which surprised Yule, asking the lady what it could be, while behind her but the bright girl, who was beautiful not only externally but also internally, answered for everyone that she had simply prepared for them everything they needed, if they still stayed to live with her, and did not— She told the couple that she had asked Lyanthus to bring all the necessary things with the suitcases to the hall, which he actually did with a smile and pleasure. But when Yule realized that Call was still angry at her and seemed even more outraged by what had started to happen, she sighed, while behind her was indeed an angry and silent Call. And she decided to show her determination and complete independence from Call by standing next to the lady and taking her hand, which surprised Estella when Yule told the psychopath. However, in the end, the guy also went with the main character, gradually walking behind her. And because of this, Yule thought that even when he was literally glowing red with anger, when all the characters arrived at their destination, the blonde Lyanthus met the lady. He decided to kiss her hand like a true gentleman, inviting her to look at his work, But Yule, looking at all this, turned away and understood that, in fact, the blonde should not even be trusted if he is a very cunning and insidious character in the plot. And while Yule was just making sure that there were a lot of people around her that she shouldn't trust, the blonde showed the lady 2 white boxes and said that he had brought what she had told him about earlier. Curious Yule immediately came closer and began to examine the strange but very beautiful mysterious boxes, while Estella smiled and asked her if and when the girl did this, she saw in a cute box a certain ball, which only because of the weak light began to glow even brighter and more beautifully, having a blue, rich color, like an ocean wave. Estella told the girl that inside this bead was engraved the symbol of Dimitri's, that is, her family. She said that this was a necessary accessory so that they could live here legally and not as guests. Comparing the jewel with the ID or passport that she had in her past life and in the real world, the blue-haired girl was not afraid to pick up the bead, examining it in the light and thanking Estella for such a gift. However, that was not all, because unexpectedly for Yule, Estella also gave her a small bag with a handful of gold coins, saying that they would need it. But if they needed more, at that moment she looked at her and noticed in her not just a person, but a real angel who radiates only light, a smile and kindness, which is why she thanked. As it turned out, the money was not the last gift from Estella, because the lady showed them 2 knights named Venin and Facil, telling them that they would be their personal bodyguards, accompanying them everywhere for safety. And after the Pada received a bunch of gifts, Yule thanked Estella for everything, and Karl did not say a word, carefully watching his partner. They again found in the same bedroom, the blue-haired main character looked with a wry expression at the gold coins that Estella had given her earlier and admired them with joy. Even she would have continued admiring the coins if Karl had not appeared next to her. And she was incredibly scared of him, which is why she dropped all the jewelry on the floor. And the guy just wanted to ask her if she really liked these yellow coins so much. And after the disgruntled lady said that if he didn't like money so much he could give it to her, the brunette only raised his eyebrows, asking if she really needed these coins. That when the evil Karl asked Yule for what purpose she needed them for, the dreamy lady did not answer right away, saying that she did not even know where to start, because she looked at the jealous and dissatisfied guy who did not leave her side for a second, which is why the lady understood that if she dreams of buying a house and using the money for the rest of a certain plan had already matured in her head, thanks to which she calmly looked at Karl and suggested that he take a walk around the city, which surprised the brunette. But Yule seemed to be in a motivational mood and decided to put her hands on her hips and loudly said that she was tired of constantly sitting in the room while the brunette calmly looked at her and was silent. And when the girl remembered that thanks to Estella, they had received many personal guards who could prevent them from walking around the city freely and without problems, she showed Karl her index finger and smiled sweetly, hinting to him. Karl was so surprised by this that he looked at the girl with his mouth open, as if he saw a miracle of the world in the emotions of the main character. And that is why the protagonist herself was so happy that she could literally glow with joy when she grabbed her friend by the hand and told him to just follow her. Because now they would not, thanks to the portal of movement, they were able to instantly move from a boring and quiet bedroom to a lively and sunny market. When there were many houses, Yule instantly became indignant, causing everything around her to seem to turn dark and purple as she yelled at Karl, asking why he didn't tell her about this earlier. Because of this, Karl and the indignant girl remembered Karl at the moment when he was still a psychopath in the Bana, being in bloody clothes, when that very magic was created around him. Because of which now he understands that he has not just good magic, but strong magic. She still looked at him with displeasure and suspicion, surprised at how he still managed to use magic, even if he hadn't learned it. But at that time, the red-eyed guy himself wasn't looking at her, because he wanted to ask something. The puzzled guy asked the lady if she knew the way because they found themselves not on a busy street with people, but on an empty street where there were only them, and because of which they needed to find the way to the market. They started to quarrel, because of which the brunette only sighed heavily and went forward himself, because the indignant Yule behind him was shouting that even though she didn't know the way to the market, there was no need to make. It seemed that the guy did not listen to her at all, because he turned his back to her and continued walking. But this surprised the main character, who began to wonder whether Karl knew the way, because this was suspicious to her. And Karl was actually able to bring the main character to a crowded market where there were all sorts of people and vendors with their shops, which amazed the main character, who was shocked by the large number of people in the city. But what surprised her even more was that when she got to such a crowded place, Kal immediately grabbed her hand so strongly and abruptly that she was indignant, screaming in pain and not understanding what sometimes happens to a stranger, pressing the girl closer to himself as if he was afraid that she would be kidnapped. The brunette looked at every passerby with apprehension, as if everyone here was his enemy, but she was also indignant, asking Kal with displeasure why he was behaving this way and whether he was ashamed to hold a girl close to him. But the guy did not answer such questions either, as if he insisted on his own. While the main character sincerely did not understand why the guy so suddenly pressed her to himself, he himself looked at someone with madness and incredible wildness, because of which he even clenched his teeth like a wild animal that is about to pounce on someone. And she decided to look in the same direction to find answers to all her questions, and as soon as she saw something in the distance, emotions of shock and curiosity immediately appeared on her face. The thing is that right in front of her and Kal, a carriage rushed past at an incredible speed, so fast that all the people around got scared and began to scold the owner of the transport, because he could easily hit more than one person. And when she looked at Kal after that, who was still worried and unhappy with the whole situation, Yul suddenly realized that he had saved her life. After the embarrassed girl thanked Kal for his help and kindly asked him to let her go, which the guy did, she noticed that everything around was literally saturated with Kal's magic, with which he was able. His strength was so great that without any effort or physical force, he forced the carriage to turn over on its side and turn into rubble, causing the glass to crack and break, and all the things that were originally in it. And while Yul was thanking the gods that there were no people in that carriage, she decided to grab Kal by the hand and make him move away from everything that had happened, because surprised people and other villagers began to gather around the carriage. The lady thought that she just wanted to have fun at the market, but in the end, everything turned out completely differently than she wanted. But at that moment, when she was leading Kalia, she noticed something, and she saw before her eyes a cute bookstore, which she immediately wanted to enter, because the building with white paint was very charming in appearance, and the heroine loved books very much. She could find something interesting for herself in it. She already wanted to enter it, but was surprised when she didn't even have to touch the door, because the brunette opened it for her, also looking at Yul silently, as if he understood her thoughts and intent. After that, the main character entered a modest store with books and a wooden floor, looking at the interior and goods. But in fact, she was thinking about Kal's gallantry. However, as soon as she opened one book in a world new to her, she immediately became dissatisfied, because only now did she realize that she did not understand written language and therefore could not read. She was even more irritated by Kal, who, instead of looking at things that interested him just like Yul, simply watched her from afar, which is why the heroine asked him if he could not look at her like that. After some time, when the girl had chosen several books about history and magic spells for herself, she placed them on the counter, causing the seller to politely tell her that. However, when the protagonist opened her bag of gold coins, she began to look at all her riches and did not understand how much she needed to give to the seller, because she assumed that 20 rappel was 20 coins, and also doubted this. And Kal did everything for her, who immediately understood that the girl did not understand finances, and therefore he calmly handed the seller 1 gold coin, because he looked calmly, but already with slight confusion, at the couple and told them that they had just given him 1,000 rupees, and therefore, if they waited a little, he would find change for them in the amount of. At that very moment, the elongated Yul looked at the guy, as if she had not only surprise, but also questions for Kal regarding how and where he managed to learn the value of coins and the currency itself. If they both grew up in the tower, she asked the guy about it, but the brunette didn't answer her right away, looking as if he didn't want to answer at all because he kept silent exactly when it was more advantageous for him, which irritated Yul more and more. Out of rage and indignation, the main character even showed him her fist, saying that he was becoming more and more suspicious with each walk. But it was the salesman who made her stop yelling at Kal, whom the heroine suddenly looked at when he appeared in front of them again, telling them that they had to wait a long time and that he apologized for that. He placed all the packed books of the main character on the table, saying that it was her goods, and also he gives her 980 rupees change. And as soon as the heroine left the store with her first own books in her hands, she smiled sweetly and closed her eyes, because she realized that for the first time she felt like an ordinary person who could live like everyone else. But when she and Kal found themselves back on the busy street, She tilted her head slightly to the side to see what she saw among the people who were preventing her from seeing what she wanted, which Kal did as well. The first to notice the strange behavior was the brunette, who looked at her with surprised red eyes and began to ask the heroine what was happening to her, because her mood had clearly changed. The thing is that the girl was so wary that it seemed as if her soul had sunk into her heels, and her whole body had frozen and at the same time began to tremble. And among the strangers and ordinary passers-by, she saw the owner of the tower in black robes, who even here was smiling sweetly and talking with one of his friends. Not yet, she decided not to hesitate and not to think about it, because she suddenly grabbed the surprised and completely confused psychopath by the hand and ran with him in a completely different direction, with anxiety on her face. To catch their breath, they decided to hide behind the wall of the house and hide in its shadow, which made Kal look around nervously, while the girl with books in her arms nervously inhaled and exhaled air after a quick run. And when Kal looked in surprise to some side, trying to say something to Yule out of shock, she also looked at him indignantly and angrily, asking if he had seen the one she— But imagine Yule's surprise when the calm guy suddenly turned to her as if nothing had happened, looked at her, and asked if this was such a big problem that she needed to hide and run away because of it. She was in complete shock, and therefore looked at him with wide eyes, not understanding what exactly he meant, because of which all the girls' TTR disappeared somewhere when she herself tried to find an answer to the question of why. Kal calmly folded his hands and began to look at the girl, asking for the second time what was wrong with the fact that they met the owner of the tower at the market. But this time the heroine was silent, looking at— The girl finally calmed down, looking at the ground and saying that out of habit she thought that he would hurt them, and therefore decided to run away from him. The angry Kal decided to just take all the girls' packed books into his hands, thinking that they had absolutely nothing to do with what the tower's owner was doing, because he was no longer connected to them, just as they were no longer connected to him. Yule was indignant, looking at Kal and asking him why he was taking her things away, and she was already preparing to run into him in order to take her things away. But he calmed her down with words in time. He looked at her with his red, bright eyes and said that he was not going to take her things away, but simply remembered the place where they now needed to go together, which interested Yule. The lady with pink eyes looked at her interlocutor in surprise and asked what he meant, but Kal had not given any clear answers up to that point. He said that he remembered that she had asked him if he had a special place he wanted to visit. She angrily replied that she had asked him that, but when she looked at how Pao was still holding her books, she was angry, although she guessed that Kal wanted to go there. Yule looked dissatisfied and still asked Kal where exactly the place he wanted to go was, and after he himself took her to where she needed to go, the blue-haired heroine was surprised. The fact is that they were on a beautiful bridge, under which there was an azure wave, crystal clear, which also reflected the glare of the sun and flowed along the current, which she replied that everything looked simply magnificent and even mesmerizing. But Yule also did not forget to ask Kal how he knew about such a beautiful place, if he had lived in a tower all his life. Taking a closer look at the water, which looked magical, Kal told Yule that it was a special channel with magic, which was entirely made up of charms, something the protagonist had not previously. Understanding that all the sparkles she sees in the water are traces of magic, the girl still wasn't upset, looking at the river with admiration and admiring it, because the presence of magic didn't bother her. But suddenly he sadly bowed his head down, which made everything around him seem to stop being so bright and joyful, because he sadly told the couple opposite her that it seemed like she didn't remember what was needed at all. Yule, it seems, did not hear him, and therefore asked Kal to repeat what he said. However, she already understood that such a taciturn guy would hardly maintain a— He just turned away from her and said that they needed to go, while the girl continued to look at the river and asked him if he was ready to just leave, since they had only come here to admire the beauty of nature. But he never turned to her because he insisted on his own, saying that he had already checked what he wanted, leaving the main character with even more questions about why they came here and what exactly Kal was checking, talking to her in strange phrases. The blue-haired lady slowly walked behind him and asked what he wanted to tell her, also clarifying why his mood had changed so much and whether it was a spring exacerbation. Looking at him, Yule still asked why he was suddenly leaving for home, clarifying whether Kal had some business that he would still like to do here before they ended up in the courtyard. And when the girl heard from the guy that he himself did not even know the answer to this question, because he had never thought about it, the girl suddenly did not go anywhere else. Because she sat down on the bench and told Carl to sit down next. She looked at him with a smile, asking if it would not be good for him to do what he so desired when he himself was no longer in the tower, where he could be beaten and kept in a cell as a mentally ill person. At first, Carl didn't answer her, as if he was used to reacting to everything with an empty, meaningless face, with which he was now looking at. But then he smiled modestly, telling the girl that it would be nice to do this, because he was already approaching the bench to sit down next to her and not rushing anywhere else. After a while, the couple began to enjoy the silence, the murmur of water and the breath of wind, because they were both silent, which is why Yule thought that sometimes the girl looked not at nature and the world around her, but at Carl himself, who was an incredibly handsome guy for her, because he had not only a harmonious appearance, but also rich. Her attention was drawn to Carl's long hair, which she wanted to touch with her hands, thinking that if she had such a beautiful face, she would use it without. The unsuspecting lady asked Carl if such long and thick hair bothered him, but in response, she received only a stunned look in her direction, which appeared because she touched his neck, which Carl touched after her. But Yule herself was surprised when, instead of talking about herself, Carl sighed and asked the heroine if she liked short hair. After all, she had once heard that. She tried to calmly explain, looking at her friend, that she didn't hate long hair, but didn't like it because of the inconvenience and heat it could create, and she thought it would be. After that, the guy decided to ask the main character in return if she was comfortable with having hair that was several times longer than his, to which she responded with discontent, saying that she was happy with. The brunette seemed to want to object to the main character, because he clearly did not like his behavior, because of the way he looked at her with malice, trying to say, but he didn't have time to do this, because the girl suddenly showed him her sincere smile and laughed out loud, asking Carl what kind of face he had just made, because that was what made. And while the blue-haired girl laughed, and because of this could not tell the guy that only thanks to his facial expression she would now be rolling on the floor, Carl himself was silent and surprised, looking at. That's why he also began to smile sweetly and have fun with Yule, forgetting that he initially wanted to leave here as soon as possible. And now he was even looking forward to it the least, because he had never felt so happy on the bench. But while they were having fun together and enjoying every moment, he didn't even suspect that at the same time, near their palace, there were already some people in brown cloaks who met with Lady Estella and Leanthus. And the main person in this company is the owner of the tower himself. Corey came here clearly with some intentions, because the smile never slipped from his face, and it was always lively. But judging by the emotions of Estella and Mr. Leanthus, they were not entirely happy about the appearance of the tower's owner, because they felt only negativity and evil from him. And even when Yule arrived at the palace and had a pleasant time in the hot bath, she had no idea about the strange guest with strange intentions. Because she smiled, thinking that she could finally live like an ordinary person and not think about the past. Because for the first time she looked around herself, bought herself books, but she still remembered the silhouette of that very owner of the tower, whom she saw at the market. Thought that if she had not met him then and had not even seen him, everything would have gone perfect. Now, when she was calmly enjoying a hot bath, calming herself down by saying that nothing terrible had happened and that she would follow Carl's advice, namely, forget the owner of the. She also smiled, remembering how easily and instantly, thanks to Kalia's magic, she got to the center of the market, thinking that if it weren't for her. But as soon as the heroine remembered who Kal would actually become in the future, more precisely, a bloodthirsty and evil ruler, she realized that she shouldn't relax, because Kal's calmness could mean that he would think of something again. However, when she calmly got out of the bath and headed to her room, she noticed Leanthus in front of her, who was calmly sitting on her bed with his arms folded and asking her if they. He got up from the bed and came closer to her, asking if they had both forgotten Estella's words and that they were forbidden to leave the palace without an escort and permission. But this only made the stunned Yule sure that everyone had found out about their secret. With his burning blue eyes, Leanthus looked at Yule and asked her if she understood the scale of her helplessness, if, in the event of their disappearance, introducing the lonely Estella, Leanthus told Yule never to act so frivolously and absurdly again, because just because of their fun, the lady could not only get upset, but also panic. Yule was calm, Understanding that judging by Leanthus's story, Estella did not yet know that they had gone to the market in secret from everyone, which is why she asked if she could feel their mana, like Kal. But she did not think that the blonde's answer surprised her more than anything. The thing is that he grabbed his head and was a little confused, as if remembering something and telling the girl that not everything was so clear, because at that moment when they were at the market, uninvited guests came to them. And he meant the owner of the tower with his magicians, who appeared under Estella's palace during the day, and met her during the day with Leanthus, which the blonde told Yule, who, upon hearing this, fell into a real shock. And while Leanthus was telling how Estella was confused when she had to deal with the owner of the tower, and that's why she didn't notice how they disappeared, Yule looked at him with real shock, asking the gentleman why he came straight to them. In response, he only started gesturing with his hands as if he didn't know anything, but continued telling the thoughtful Yule that, according to the tower's owner, they should go through a couple of tests after liberation, which they should have been told about earlier. But noticing that Yule visibly tensed up when she heard such news, which caused fear to be painted on her confused face, the Ballonin told her not to worry so much. Recalling how the tower's owner left with his mages immediately after his visit, Leanthus told the heroine that Lady Estella had refused all his requests, which is why she, like Kal, would never. Surprised by the whole situation, Udal looked at the blonde and only asked if she could tell Kal about everything, to which the guy in a dark suit and with folded hands replied that of course she had. However, what struck her even more was that the blonde had no intention of leaving after telling her the most important thing, but only approached her and began to smile sweetly. Touching her blue hair herself, the girl noticed with surprise that her hair was very wet, and that was probably why Leanthus was worried, because he was afraid that the street and hot baths would cause Yule's health to deteriorate. He smiled and told her to dry her hair, because if she got sick, Estella would be very upset. But his words also proved that he often thought of Mrs. Leanthus as the person who came first for him. After some time, the main character remembered the face of the tower's owner, or rather, his sly and insidious smile when he told her in the darkness that she should not survive. Because no matter who Estella chooses, it was precisely this that she remembered as she ran down the corridor and had an incredible desire to tell Kal about everything, who probably still did not suspect anything. And when the girl was running along the night street and wanted to quickly tell Kal about everything she had heard, she noticed him not just near the fountain, but near Madame Estella, when they were both sitting nicely on a bench and talking. She began to stare at how the girl with the same cute appearance as hers laughed at Kalem and smiled at him, while he did not react in any way and just looked at her, not supporting the conversation in any way. After that, the main character immediately hid behind the wall and began to think that she clearly saw something that she shouldn't have seen. But now she doesn't understand why Kal is talking to Estella. And at night, having decided to look at the couple again, she captured how Estella was not just telling something, but smiling at Kal, which made everything around seem to glow with a bright light, while the guy himself did. Without thinking, the protagonist silently and with an empty head decided to move away from the very door near which she stood, hiding from the couple. But she still turned to it and did not She still looked at the door and seemed to want Kal to appear in front of her and go with her into the room. But this never happened. So the thoughts of Kal appearing in front of her were only her dreams, and she decided to turn away from the door for the second time and walk towards the bedroom, although her soul was filled with very heavy emotions. Hugging the red blanket with her arms, the girl with blue eyes fell onto the bed and no longer wanted to do anything, trying only to find answers to the question of why he felt so terrible. But the morning came very quickly, which is why the beautiful palace was again covered with a bright blue sky, which gives life to trees and foliage, and in her bedroom, the protagonist sat on her bed, thinking that she had no reason to worry about seeing him with Kal, and she also thought that she felt all this because of stress. However, she was suddenly interrupted from her thoughts by Kal in a red and black suit, who leaned against the wall and greeted the girl, but his words frightened Yule so much that she literally jumped up on the spot. And when a handsome guy looked at her, she said that the girl with blue eyes and hair asked her to give her some time. But she herself only noticed how beautifully the guy was dressed and how the suits. At first, she didn't hear the Kal's words the first time, because she was only paying attention to the guy's beauty. but then she lowered her eyes and told him that she would do so. But he never left the main character's room, but only stood and looked at her with his hands folded, as if trying to tell her something, which is why the lady staring at him asked what. The guy with black hair looked at her with obvious interest and curiosity, asking what happened to her face, which is why he looks at her with bewilderment. But if she didn't plan to respond to all the guy's words, she just turned away from him with indignation, asking for whom he dressed up so nicely and cut his hair, although he had never done that before. However, as soon as the girl realized that she had revealed all her true feelings to the guy and her displeasure, she covered her mouth with her hands in shock and realized that she had not thought about what she had just blurted out. She remained firmly on the bed, covering her face and creating an awkward silence, which caused the surprised and confused Carl to ask what she meant by her words. And when he calmly told the lady that he had just heard her call him handsome, the blue-haired lady became even more indignant and said that everything was wrong, and she asked him what he meant. But only the girl's words, spoken in a fit of emotion, made Carl not only embarrassed, but also blush when he looked at the floor and said that she still couldn't hide the fact that she was. However, the lady was afraid to even look at Carl after such an awkward moment, which is why she now tried to calm herself down by saying that she had only said it in a fit of stress or emotion. And after some time, the race appeared before the door of Madame Estella's room, not intending to enter yet, because in her head there were all sorts of thoughts about what the aristocrat would say to her. Thinking that it was very awkward for her to see Estella in front of her after she disobeyed her words and left the palace without permission, Yule suddenly saw the door open itself, and a smiling heroine appeared in front of her, who was happy to see the protagonist as her relative. Quickly taking Yule by the hand and saying that she felt her magic behind the door and therefore opened the door, Estella forced her friend to enter the office, telling her that she really wanted to give her something. And when the main character already thought that Estella would give her money again, that's why she was surprised. Like, why she gives it so often? She was surprised when she realized that what Yule saw there surprised her so much that her face showed genuine surprise and shock. And her eyes sparkled with joy when Estella calmly said that at the moment when Estella was saying Mokal had already told her that the girl loved to count, the book lover looked at the girl, who seemed to be glowing with happiness, turned to Yule and told her that thanks to magic, she had transferred the office in which she studied at school to this room. At first, the lady was surprised and understood that Kal wanted to do all this only for her. But then she smiled, telling the aristocrat that she really liked such a surprise. Looking at various books and shelves, Estella walked around the office and told Yule that this was now her personal room, and she would go. However, when Estella left, the blue-haired lady seriously thought about what had happened between her and Kal yesterday, because she had seen with her own eyes how they talked at night near the fountain. This is exactly what Yule recalls in her gray head, who even, it seems, in her dreams remembers a lot about Estella's sincere smile when she looked at Kal, she even grabbed her head and started saying that she should have thought about it many times before getting angry. But in the end, she asked herself the main question regarding why it bothered her at all. But she had no idea that her intentions to properly thank Kal for the gift would lead to her waking up one day right on his lap, which surprised her so much that she couldn't believe it was real. A few hours ago, when the girl did not think that this could happen, she calmly talked to Kal, who was next to her and heading somewhere, which is why Yule asked him where he intended to go. He said that he would bring lunch right here, and so he hurried out of the office, leaving the main character alone with a book in her hands just at the moment when she was watching him. But when she lowered her eyes to the book, reading from it that there is also some kind of magic for changing appearance and appearance, she became interested, reading more and more about this topic, because it described in detail how to. However, as soon as she read some incomprehensible words from the book, which turned out to be a spell for turning into some kind of animal, she suddenly disappeared, which is why even the book could fall. She, already being in her right mind, was in shock, because she managed to transform into someone the first time and thus use transformation magic. But she was in real shock, not understanding. The thing is that she managed to turn into a sea and a gray, small animal, more like a cat, which has a light belly and a pancake-like, fluffy tail, and at the moment when the heroine was already experiencing all the advantages of being a cat, An unsuspecting Kal entered the office with a tray of food in his hands. But what was his surprise when he did not even notice Yule in the place where she had been before? As if she had disappeared in a matter of minutes where there were only simple chairs, a table with lamps, and high shelves with books. He entered the office in order to first of all examine the chair on which Yule was sitting and reading a book. And there he noticed something that immediately attracted his attention, and because of which he looked at the floor with slight surprise. And he did this because she saw a small movement behind the furniture. Because as it turned out, Yule was waving her cattail, which was peeking out from behind the nightstand, which gave a what a cattle doubling of the protagonist, when Kal immediately caught her and picked her up in order to take her in his arms, when she herself hoped that he would not notice her. In the end, she decided to sing it so loudly, as if she were a real cat. But this only surprised Kal, who heard in her hissing and words not to touch her. Although thanks to this, he understood that it was remembering what the text in the book she had decided to read looked like. The girl, with indignation and horror, wanted to die of shame more than explain the whole situation to Kal. And especially, she tossed and turned and tried to get out. But Kal still held her very tightly in his arms, while the girl thought that she did not want this at all and did not even read this. But what surprised her even more was that Kal, without any shock, sat down on the chair and continued to hold the cat Yule in his hands, which is why she fell silent, not understanding what her friend wanted to do. Yule was indignant for a long time because she did not understand why Kal, knowing that she was Yule, began to gently stroke her like a real cat. Kal looked at her and stroked her, while the cat with blue fur like Yule's hair meowed, because she wanted to say that she hadn't really planned on letting him touch her so easily. But now she could, and she herself did not notice how she fell asleep. And when she woke up with horror and real shock, she realized that all this time she had been sleeping on Kal's lap, who was also sleeping, not even moving to make it comfortable. But when she tried to run away from him as quietly as possible, so as not to create even more awkwardness, she was surprised because she felt the guy's hand on her body, which was a real surprise for her. The thing is that he pulled her closer to him as if subconsciously while in a dream, which is why Yule was worried. Knowing that now it would not be as easy. Realizing her hopelessness, the girl with blonde hair was so surprised that she opened her mouth in shock, thinking that this was real madness, and she did not understand what was happening. Looking at Kal's face, the girl realized that the guy was still sleeping, because he didn't open his eyes even when he held her with his hand, thanks to which Yule calmed down at least a little, hoping that she could escape. In the end, she still managed to get out of Kal's embrace without waking him up, which is why she was already standing not far from him, sighing tiredly, surprised at herself, because she thought that she would never get out of his grip again. Turning to him, the blue-haired lady decided to take a last look, wondering why he was sleeping in such a position, although she immediately overshadowed her thoughts with calm due to the fact that he had fallen asleep after. Looking at his cute face as the brunette slept, the girl thanked the gods that her magic hadn't ended the moment he found her. Otherwise, she would have turned into a human right in front of him. However, when she turned around and planned to look at Kal more, which even made her embarrassed, she heard his voice behind her, which questioningly said her name, as soon as she turned around, the guy sitting on the chair said only one word, talking about the cat, but only because of this the girl got scared, shuddered on the spot, and asked the guy what he meant when he came out of. He sat calmly in the chair and told Yule that he had met an ash-colored cat here, and now he couldn't understand where it could have gone. So he asked her if she had seen the. Pretending not to know anything, the protagonist began to get angry at Kal and tell him persistently that she had not seen any cats here, and that he had probably imagined everything. When Kal stood up from his chair and followed Yule, who in turn headed towards the exit of the office, she reassured him by saying that perhaps he had just dreamed it. And suddenly the guy said that now she even taught him to grow without even blushing, because of which Yule turned to him and asked what he said, not hearing his words. But the brunette only said that he didn't say anything. The very next day, the main character did not lie in bed or read books, but tried on a variety of dresses, showing off all her beauty to Estella, and she also tried on a dress of darker colors, for example purple, which surprised her even more, and Estella, who was watching this, only admired the beauty of the girl. The delighted lady looked at Yule and clenched her hands into fists, telling the protagonist that all dresses suit her, and therefore she wants to offer her to buy all the dresses, which surprised Yule, asking, "So this too?" But when Estella told her to wait until she paid for all the dresses, and the heroine herself was thinking that she did not need so many dresses for just one festival that would last a week, she noticed a handsome Call in a new suit, and she extended her hand to the glass of water, begging the Paroncha for help, because in fact she was tired of constantly trying on. After this, Call sat down on the chair calmly and humbly, when the girl asked him why he was sitting and looking at her, giving her a glass of water as if he wanted to take great care of her health. Because even in this, she saw the guy simply asked her not to disappear from his sight. But in response to this, Yule only threw up her hands, saying that she would never be able to escape from him, because even when the main character had lived the whole day and was already in her bedroom, but there was a large window letting the bright light into her bedroom, she thought that her plan to escape from here was still in. Looking at the ceiling and the red bed, the girl thought that even after such a long time, nothing had changed. Although she still had a plan to leave the castle, forgetting about Cal, Estella. However, she was not sleeping alone, because she turned her head and looked at the one who was sleeping on the sofa in her room. Or rather, at the red-eyed blonde, who was sleeping peacefully, and she looked at that character who was lying on the sofa and sleeping, when his body was covered with a blanket. And the lady herself looked, and did not understand how to deal with such a. He got up from the bed silently. The girl went to the door and already stretched out her hands to open it, because she had previously heard several knocks on the door, which is why she realized that there was clearly a guest behind. And as soon as she opened the door, she saw in front of her a golden-haired Leanthus with blue eyes, who was smiling sweetly at her. But having decided to calm down, the girl opened the door wider and came closer to Leanthus, asking him what he personally needed at such a time. But in response, she heard from the blonde. And after the girl told the bonding to be quieter, the guy responded by telling her that he had noticed that they had begun to sleep together in the same bedroom more and more often. But he said that he had not come here for that, but to tell her something. And when they both noticed that the brunette was still sleeping peacefully and even opened his mouth in sweet sleep, Leanthus said that it seemed that because of this man, she would not be able to move even one step out of the room. The girl immediately realized that she needed to do something for Cal, and so she silently walked up to the table to take a pen and paper and write a letter to the brunette, in which she would say that she had left the. And having written in a note that she needed to leave the bedroom to go to the office for a while, the girl went out into the corridor to Leanthus and told him to just go, while he smiled and said that she must be very tired. It wasn't just a walk and talk, because they soon found themselves at a table where there were all sorts of goodies, from cookies to muffins, and next to them were cups of tea. And in front of her, the girl saw a smiling Leanthus, who was also sitting on the sofa opposite her, which is why the curious lady asked him what he wanted to ask her. First of all, remembering that when the girl arrived at the palace, thanks to the portal, she was transported to the imperial palace. And after Leanthus asked the girl exactly what Christian looked like, the girl, remembering his sad face, told the blonde in front of her that he was truly sad and devastated. Leanthus replied that everything was as it should be, which is why the lady asked the blonde if he had asked her everything he wanted, to which he replied that he actually wanted to ask her something else, but he didn't dare to do it. He also said that he was now sure that he would not need extra courage, because she herself was asking him to tell her everything. However, the guy with golden hair still didn't want to say everything directly, so he told the girl that he was afraid and he was really scared, so he couldn't help it, which makes the protagonist even more interested. And after the guy admitted that he still wouldn't ask her anything because he was afraid of her answer, the lady responded calmly by only asking Leanthus if she could ask him something. To this, the guy at the table with delicacies and cups of tea responded with a smile, saying that he was pleased that she also had some interest in something and wanted to listen to her attentively. After that, the sweet lady began to tell the blonde with golden hair about the most wonderful spells that she had read in books, and especially about the magic of movement, when Leanthus listened to her attentively. After hearing all this, the guy just leaned his elbow on his arm and thoughtfully told her that he heard that she recently used movement magic with ease, although she could not read the spell correctly and completely. And because of the talk about magic, the guy decided to remind her of that very moment when he approached her with an ulke and asked for help, about which he was now arguing whether she wanted to accept his offer to learn magic from him or not. He also began to tell her that he knew that she was counting on Estella, who also had magic. But Leanthus warned her that she had been a magician since birth, so she did not need to study, and therefore she would not be able. Holding a spoon in his hand and smiling, the blonde said that, unlike Estella, he was well-versed in magic and could become the best teacher for her. However, the real argument for the heroine was that she remembered Kahl as a villain who would surely sense her magic if something went wrong. And he also wouldn't be able to learn stealth magic from Estella because he knows she wants to escape from the palace. Imagining herself looking up with determination, the girl realized that she couldn't ask Estella to teach her the mysterious magic that she would definitely need, because in that case, the lady would definitely suspect something. Although Estella can create magic with luminous properties in her hands, she will not tell Yule about secret magic, because sooner or later she will understand that the protagonist is clearly. However, when she remembered Kahl, who does not leave her alone even at night, the girl sighed from fatigue and told the blonde that in any case, their plans will not come true. The smiling blonde man with blue eyes answered the girl that she shouldn't worry about that either, because there is a special, silent magic, thanks to which she can learn everything she wants. At the same time, while the brunette with red eyes was sleeping, not even suspecting what Yule was planning, the heroine herself was already planning to learn the silent magic that Leanthus had told her about, saying that it was the ideal option for her. He told her about everything with a smile and inspiration, although Yule still did not understand why he was so inspired by this, even if he did not offer anything in exchange. And after that very conversation with Leanthus, the girl lay on her bed, tired and exhausted, because now every day Estella teaches her acceptable magic, and imagining herself with Kahl, who was dressed in luxurious, dark clothes, fluttering in the wind, Yule remembered that now the day had come for the beginning of the festival, for which she had been having imagined how incredibly beautiful the market would be, where people would walk and celebrate for a whole week. The heroine was already preparing to enjoy the festival, which already sounds like an incredible fairy tale. As the day dawned, the main character was already there, and her eyes were dazzled by the various delicacies and bright things in the market, while behind her, a tall Kahl was. However, as soon as they got out of the carriage and walked a little along the Uday, where the girl wanted to walk around, look at the different decorations, she did not expect that she, along with. And Yule already wanted to come to terms with this, pretending to smile and telling Estella that she liked everything very much, while she was answering, saying that she had selected dishes especially for them. But suddenly a dissatisfied Kahl banged on the table. Unexpectedly for everyone, getting up from the table, Kahl told everyone that if they needed a doll that would be comfortable to play with, let them use someone else. But he did so because he grabbed the lady by the hand and hurried out of the room as quickly as possible, while Estella and Leanthus looked at them in surprise, and while Yule tried to persuade the psychopath, and while Estella could not calm down from fear and anxiety, the couple was already walking down the street, because Kahl was dragging her along with him and did not stop while the girl was indignant at him and asking where they were going. Looking at his appearance, dark hair, and the same dark coat, the girl still did not understand why he was so angry, although she thought that he would be unhappy with all the events. And suddenly he turned to her, telling her that she was still kind to everyone even when she had to adapt to others, and that was why he was interested in why she was so merciful to everyone. He squeezed her wrist so hard that the girl couldn't even move from shock, and while she was trying to find words to express her emotions, the guy jealously growled that she was so kind to everyone except. Because of this understanding, his eyes became so bright that everyone around him could notice them. And a sinister smile appeared on his face when he realized that the incredibly important Yule treated him differently than others, even worse. Remembering that Estella and Leanthus were probably looking for them now, the lady sighed and calmed down, telling Kahl that everything was as he said, and she really was comfortable at the table. But that did not mean that she needed to be. But the tall guy had no intention of fulfilling Yule's demands because he loomed over her and asked again why she couldn't tell everyone that she didn't like something. His anger was so great that he honestly admitted to the girl that everything was turning over in his head, and he felt bad, which is why he grabbed his head, which is why Yule came closer to him. But when he started to tell her that it wasn't even because of his health, The girl remembered how she sat at the table discontentedly one day, which Call, who was passing by, noticed, and it affected him so much. However, the lady only grabbed him by the collar and asked why he was comparing her to a poor kitten, which he had said earlier. But the most important thing, and suddenly a heavy downpour started in his throat, because of which everyone around began to seek shelter or run indoors. Not the couple. Yule lowered her head and sighed tiredly, while drops of rain ran down her face, and she herself understood that once again the downpour had started at the most inopportune moment, and because of this she wanted to make a decision faster. Having decided to hide from the rain, the couple decided to sit down on the cardboard boxes that were near the house, where they silently waited for the rain to stop. Until Carl raised his eyes, the girl also looked at her damp dress, touching the bow and realizing that it was very expensive, and she even felt sorry. But all her thoughts were interrupted when she felt Carl's fingers and palm on her hand, who wanted to be closer to Yule and support her even.